absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. If you want to fight for Remain, vote Labour. Now, there are some who say we don't need Brexit to work. We need to reverse it. I couldn't disagree more. Day after day, there are new allegations of sleaze, of favours, of privileged access. And it's all very well the Prime Minister saying, well, say now, well, I'm paying for it.
You've decided to repay £6,000 worth of gifts.
Lord Ali is facing an investigation. I wonder how concerned you are that your biggest donor was not fully transparent.
Are you saying you made a mistake?
It was right for me to make those repayments. Thank you. Of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner, but don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around. I'm anti-Trump. I would like to send my warmest congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, good morning to you. This is Alex Phillips and I'm going to be with you until 1 o'clock today on what is the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Big celebrations up and down the country, remembering that important victory, our escape from tyranny, our escape from a German empire, if you will. Well, as much as we managed to get that over the course of time. I won't say anything about the EU, but very important day, I think, and a day that I really want you to share your stories, essentially. We know now that basically those people who fought in that war, who lived through not just the First World War but the Second World War, are very few in number. And so how important it is, the stories that we've been told by our parents, our grandparents, perhaps our great-grandparents, their living memories of what it was like to fight, what it was like to be in Britain at war, the last time, of course, that there was any sort of war on our own shores. That Blitz spirit, the community pulling together, the bravery of the men and women whose lives were turned upside down, every single person part of that war effort. And I want to hear your stories, whether you had a parent that was an evacuee, perhaps you were. I want to know about what it was like to be fighting, what it was like to be defending, what it was like to have to live under rationing. The sort of things that to us seem so far away, such a distant memory, that it's far too easy to just take with a sort of lackadaisical shrug of the shoulders, that was then, this is now, because it's quite clear that we're still a continent in turmoil. And nobody can ever predict war. Nobody could say, oh, well, on this date next year, that's when it's going to begin. Because if we could, we would do everything to avoid it. And all too often, we find ourselves in a situation that was not anticipated, needing that sort of resolve, needing that sort of cohesion that is required when a country pulls together to fight its enemies. I want as many of you as possible to give me a call and tell me your stories on air. 0344 499 1000. Let's do this properly. Please call that number. Please recount your grandparents' stories, your parents' stories, your great-grandparents' stories. Let's all share in those memories and make them living memories again. Because, as the motto goes, lest we forget. If we do so, if we allow to slip by with the sands of time, the histories, the experiences, the lessons from that period of our nation's story, we will be much the poorer for it. So 03444 99 1000 is the number to call. It's charged at your normal network rate. You can also send me a WhatsApp on that number, or indeed leave me a voice note on WhatsApp with your particular family story connected to the Second World War. 8722 is the number to text me. Remember to write the word talk before your message, and we're on X at talkTV. OK, let's get stuck into some news first, because it might be a bank holiday, but it's a very newsy one, I can tell you that much. I'm joined now by Jonathan Haslam, former Director of Communications at number 10 Downing Street. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Good morning to you, Alex. And can I just endorse what you just said about keeping history alive? Just so important for our country, not to wade in nostalgia, but to understand what this country can actually do.
Exactly. Do you have anything that you'd like to share with us, whether, you know, from your own parents during wartime?
You know, the most important thing that I can say here is the impact on people. And my father never, ever spoke about his service in the army. He was in it from 1939 to 1945, and he carried out his military duties in Egypt and Italy, and it was never anything that he wanted to talk about.
Yeah, do you know, it's interesting. My granddad was just the same. He was in the RAF, and he was largely based, I think, North Africa and the Middle East. And I remember saying to him, Egypt as well, I remember saying to him, what were the pyramids like? He just said, too busy. We didn't look at them. But no, he was exactly the same. He was like, I don't, you know, that was the past and we don't want to talk about it. But I have amazing stories from my grandma, who I hope my mum's going to join me a bit later to tell us her mum's stories, what my grandma got up to in the Second World War. But it is so important we continue to keep this and hold it in our minds, because it's so easy to get complacent and just sort of not feel the impact of that sacrifice that was made. Let's talk some politics now. And I mean, rather strikingly, Louise Haigh, who was, of course, a cabinet minister for transport until she wasn't, due to stories about mobile phones, has turned round and said the way that the Labour Party should take the fight to Nigel Farage after those stunning local election results would be to raise taxes. Now, I must admit, when I read that, I thought to myself, that doesn't seem to be the message I would be taking out of these elections. Your response to that?
100% agree with you. And the government's backed itself into a corner. It did this out of a lack of spine during the election and the run-up to the election. It ruled out those major tax revenue raising options that it has, VAT and our income tax particularly. And then that's created a huge bunch of problems for them, because they probably do need to raise some additional funds, and now they're stuck with the Treasury looking down the back of the sofa for the odd bits and pieces, which always leaves you unintended consequences. I think Louise Haigh has demonstrated why we're better off with her out of the cabinet than in it, because telling a government like this at the moment just to do a complete volte-face is not going to do anything at all for its credibility whatsoever. So we need to be careful about the knee-jerk reactions and people with a political axe to grind. What a surprise in politics. She's certainly got an axe to grind. She should, I think, as far as Keir Starmer is concerned, go away and grind it somewhere else, because this is not the answer to the problems. It's 4 years from an election. It's really important, actually, what we're seeing now, I think, Alex, in terms of reform. We don't know whether or not this is going to last, but we've moved into a different phase because we've had a collapse of the traditional party, the Conservatives, the rise of reform, and now reform has got to do more than just talk about stuff. It's got to do it. And we've got 1,367, I think, new councillors. The world's journalists, certainly Fleet Street's journalists, will be looking avidly at them to see how effective the due diligence has been that Nigel Farage has put in place, and whether or not we have sound and sensible people trying to make things better, or is it littered with a bunch of fruitcakes? So there's plenty to talk about. It's going to keep us really busy for a long, long time.
I mean, this is what's so fascinating. I mean, when you look at those results, when the projected vote share based upon, yes, some might say, well, it wasn't all councils. Well, you know, Labour authorities weren't really up for grabs. They had opted out of having to face the ballot. I wonder why. But what I would say is if you were going to, you know, do an industry standard poll and look at a sample size, that was a pretty big sample size. And to have a projected vote share of 30% compared to, I think it's 18% for Labour, 15% for the Tories, seems to me not so much a flash in the pan, but something that could well be built to last. And you're right, now we've got to see the party in action, and they don't have experience. And a lot of these men and women who've been elected to local government level may never have been elected or involved with politics at all. But more often than not, people don't tend to scrutinise local governance. Yes, the local newspapers might do this, but it's never been of interest to national press in particular. Perhaps this will now actually bring something which is quite useful in society, which is for the first time we are going to be looking at the various different stratas of governance and holding people to account there.
Well, yes, to a point. I mean, I think that local government has been scrutinised in the past quite a lot, but that's, of course, in a pre-digital era when we had far many more newspapers, local newspapers, looking at what was going on. But the other point to take into account, I think, Alex, is to what extent can people at local council levels really influence big things? They have their hands tied. Many of these councils are bankrupt. Many of them have got most of their expenditure on social care and children's needs. The flexibility to do great things in local government is pretty highly constrained. And one thing that has caused me concern is the fallback on the reformed talking list of that issue, vital though it is, of immigration, and saying we are now in a position to go and challenge this in the courts. Well, two things. First of all, Labour has tried to challenge national views on this and national legislation in the courts and failed. And who pays for it? For my money, it's in the same bank as Sadiq Khan saying yet again, I'm going to challenge a third runway at Heathrow. We've been through that. It's a delaying tactic. It costs a huge amount of ratepayers' money, which could be far better spent in the face of reality.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point of what I was going to get on to, actually, which is this has been probably the centrepiece of their local election campaign, and no wonder they've done so well. It's clearly the biggest doorstep issue. And without doubt, people want to feel represented. And if the local population say, we don't want an asylum hotel here, we don't want migrants being put into private rental accommodation in our particular constituency, then they have a right to be heard. But you are correct in pointing out, if it comes to judicial reviews, essentially the taxpayer is paying both sides of that legal argument at a time when budgets are very constrained. Same, I would imagine, as well, with the idea of doing an audit and picking out the sort of jobs that they might deem to be connected to waste, whether they be DEI hires or the same, or looking at people's salaries, those who are more than the Prime Minister, and looking to make pay cuts, because those equally could face legal challenges. But is this not essentially creating an opportunity for reform to say we're doing our best, we're trying to fight the system, this is what the system actually looks like, exposing some of that stuff, and in doing so, create a sort of solid platform for campaigning going into a general election?
Well, it's all entirely fair for you to raise those points. I think they're very important points. Certainly, I don't think we should ever take anything in government or local authority spending as a given, and people do it all tremendously well. There will be elements which are wasteful. What we need to do, though, is to have that proper balance that says, well, let's look at this. I think at the end of the day, you're likely to find that those elements you can pick out as wasteful spending are going to be a drop in the ocean compared with the amount of money that's actually involved in local authority, and certainly at a national level. National level, you can have a different argument. You can talk about HS2. If you're in Scotland, you can talk about the appalling waste of money that's happened over their ferry exercise under Glen Sannox. But here at local level, it's going to be different. It's going to be smaller. What we want is dedicated councillors who are going to sort out things that matter day to day. Your bin collections. For heaven's sake, can we not get rid of some of these potholes that we face that cause aggravation? They clog up areas. My own area of southeast London, it almost feels like I'm ring-fenced with the amount of roadworks going on, taking forever. And I think that's where we're looking for change. We're looking for efficiency, understanding the world is difficult and it's complicated, but people who are dedicated in getting things sorted, that's what we want from our local councillors.
I mean, there's reports that Labour's plan to box away Nigel Farage is going on the attack against his, and I quote here, fawning over Putin. What do you think about that strategy? Because, look, I know Nigel, and I know Nigel well. I don't think he particularly fawns over Putin. I think he's made salient points before about the fact that Putin is a tough leader. I think he's also pointed out as well that Putin regards Western expansionism in the form of the EU and NATO as a provocative gesture. But also knowing Nigel well, I don't think he fawns over Putin at all. I think he's actually come out and been relatively strong about saying about Trump's disengagement from the process that he completely disagrees with it. But Labour are going for what I think is a sort of cheap attack, playing the man, not the ball, and based upon rather, I think, dubious grounds. Do you like this sort of stuff in politics? Would you rather see politicians face each other down on the real issues rather than sort of confected vibes?
Well, we have to admit, of course, that you do play the man and the woman rather than the ball on many occasions in politics, and that's part of its endless fascination. In terms of getting things done, I think it's not necessarily the right way of approaching Nigel Farage. He's charismatic in a way that no other leader in this country is at the moment. He's also immensely pragmatic. He will tack away from Donald Trump. He will tack away from Elon Musk. He will tack away from Putin. He may have a natural inclination to say, actually, strong people, I know what's right. I know what needs to be fixed, and I'm going to do it. And then to ride roughshod over people. But the other side is exactly as you said. What are the policies? I think very few of us in the country actually know what really the policies would be of a reform government. And we'll also look at something else. Now, of course, very few people are going to be able to tell us the complete makeup and the names of the cabinet that we have at the moment. But actually, if you talk about reform, I think most people would be hard-pressed to say anything other than Nigel Farage. He's both its greatest asset, he's also his greatest liability. Because after Nigel Farage, what is there?
And is he going to be the next Prime Minister? Because Kemi Badenoch has acknowledged during the sort of Sunday political programmes that this could well happen. Do you think it's plausible?
Well, I'd take the same attitude as Kemi Badenoch ought to have taken if she was pragmatic, which is the answer should have been, my job's to rebuild the Conservative Party and get us back into government, and my policies are X, Y and Z. You don't give credibility to somebody under those circumstances. You need some better media training.
Jonathan, thank you ever so much. Delighted to have you join us today. That was Jonathan Haslam, former Director of Communications at Number 10 for past Prime Minister John Major. Let's go to calls now and speak to Janice, who is in Swindon. Good morning to you, Janice.
Hello, Alex. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yes, OK, thank you.
Now, talk to me. What have you called about?
Well, I'm calling mainly about my wonderful mum and dad who went through the war, and they lived at South East London. Eltham, right on the side of Shooters Hill, so they were quite in sort of Bomb Alley, really. My dad was an architect and surveyor. He was exempt from war service because he'd had TB when he was a kid, but he worked for Sidcup Council. Part of his job was to record the bomb damage to the properties in the borough. He had to do this straight after the raids because some of the houses, he had to say whether they should be pulled down or whether they could be repaired. And I found a book recently of some of the maps that he actually did, and all of that's recorded in a massive book. But all he said about it was that it wasn't very pleasant. But, of course, they were still pulling people out, immediately after the raids. And two things really stick in my mind about my dad's experience. He said he had to lie in the gutter when he was cycling to work, when all the doodle bugs were coming over quite frequently. That was the only protection he felt he had at that point. And then him going up to the common above Greenwich when the docks were burning, and he just said he stood and cried. I've just got so much admiration of that, to generation. You know, I worked with the elderly for many years, and I was lucky enough to meet just ordinary people who, when they actually told you about what they'd done, typing up the D-Day plans and going up the beaches in floating tanks, and just such ordinary people who didn't crow on about it and didn't keep on about how it had affected them for the rest of their lives, although I'm sure it probably had. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't born till 1948, but such respect for those folk. And
it's incredible. Janice, that was a wonderful story. This is exactly the sort of stuff I want today. It brings tears to my eyes. It sends shivers down your spine. You cannot imagine. You're walking around London today, it's so hard to imagine what this city would have been like under attack. And, you know, there's part of London, Smith Square in Westminster, within sort of an easy hearing range of the striking of Big Ben. And there's a particular road when you go down to Smith Square where you can still see all the signs painted on the frontages of the building saying bomb shelters and public shelters with the arrows, where they have a network of cellars underneath. And it's just, it's impossible to imagine what Janice's father went through, standing in the common above Greenwich, looking down, looking at it on fire with tears in his eyes, having to jump into a gutter to avoid the doodle bugs. What an incredible story. Thank you so much, Janice, for your call. More of this today, please. Let's keep those memories alive. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can also send me a WhatsApp on that number. Text messages 87222. Put talk before your message. I'm going to do another message here before we go to break. Hi, Alex. My grandfather was in the RAF and also stationed in Egypt and Italy. Hey, see, maybe all our grandparents knew each other, because my granddad was RAF. And at one point was in Egypt, I'm sure. He met my Neapolitan grandmother, married her and took her to the UK. He also never spoke of the war. I asked him once, and his response was, "Why do I want to tell you about my friends being killed?" I never asked him again. However, if there hadn't been a war, my grandparents wouldn't have met, and I wouldn't be here now. So every VE Day, I say a prayer and remember all those brave men and women who fought for our freedom. Best wishes, Mary. Please share your stories on this most important of days, the 80th anniversary of VE Day. I'm going to get tearful today. I just know I am. Anyway, right, going to take a short break now. When we come back, Ed Miliband's net zero deadline is unrealistic, says a union boss. Oh, they're suddenly realising the pinch it's going to create. We're discussing that after this.
By the way, I looked on the National Grid Live, which is where you can see how much electricity we're generating from renewables and other sources. Now, the other day, when it was absolutely roastingly sunny, we were still using 60% of our energy was coming from nuclear. It was coming from fossil fuels and gas and interconnectors, i.e. not from this country, coming across the channel. So very little was actually coming from wind and from solar.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show now. Sir Keir Starmer has been urged by one of Labour's largest supporting unions to ignore the false prophets of climate fundamentalism and rethink the government's net zero plan. This is Gary Smith, the GMB General Secretary, saying that the government's pledge to switch to clean power by 2030, less than 5 years, was totally unrealistic and could lead to blackouts like those seen in Spain last week. He also criticises plans to ban future North Sea exploration licences, saying it would accelerate the decline of domestic oil and gas production and increase our dependency on gas imports. Who would have thunk? Of course, Ed Miliband is the one in denial, because he seems to think that all that stuff's necessary. He wants to cement over all of our various sort of oil wells and just go hurtling towards a land of, I don't know, buying solar panels and wind turbines from China. Oh, yeah, can't do that anymore. And basically plunging us into a total decline, possibly apocalypse. Let's speak to Rupert Darwell, author of Green Tyranny. I mean, Rupert, thank goodness someone on the left is saying this. The unions have quite a lot of sway over the Labour Party, but it's blimmin' obvious, isn't it? I mean, Gary Smith also saying this rush to clean power was sending British jobs overseas, yet Ed Miliband, with his sort of perpetually congested voice, would tell us, oh, no, it's going to create loads of jobs in the UK. This is brilliant for UK industry. Oh, it's going to free us from the shackles of depending on ne'er-do-well hostile regimes for fossil fuels. That's a load of baloney, isn't it?
Oh, you're quite right, Alex. Great to be joining you. Yeah, Gary Smith and GMB are a voice of reason and common sense on the energy debate. They know that jobs, well-paying jobs, are at stake and that they are being destroyed by the drive towards net zero. And you're, of course, absolutely right. The jobs that are being created, that will be created from net zero, won't be in Britain. They'll be in China, as has happened. We've seen that with solar, with the solar industry. It's a huge Chinese industry now. Not a job here from making solar PV panels.
It seems to me around the world, the lure of trying to be sort of morally self-righteous and go hard and fast for net zero is beginning to wane, not just with Donald Trump, but more and more people sort of waking up to the reality of how impoverished their nation will become. I think what happened in Spain was clearly some kind of wake-up call. What are your thoughts on that, by the way? Because, of course, you know, they've ruled out this idea that it might have been a cyber attack, and yet they're not discussing what actually went on there. I think most of us understand, even though I don't understand much about how national grids work, that it was the very fluctuations in power production that seemed to total the distribution of energy across Spain, and those fluctuations are tied directly, as far as I understand, to net zero technologies.
Yeah, that's right. So what you have with electricity is unique in the energy world because it has to be produced the moment it's consumed. And as soon as it's produced, it has to be consumed. So what happened in Spain is that they have got a huge amount of solar capacity. It was a very sunny day. So as the sun rose through the morning, more and more solar energy was being produced. It was flooding the grid. It caused it caused a frequency fluctuation and a cascade of shutdowns, of cascading blackouts. And that's what happened with Spain. And that is the fundamental problem with renewables, is that they are weather dependent. They're not demand dependent. You can't adjust the amount of electricity they produce to demand, to what's actually needed. So we have a fundamentally fragile grid where the more solar and wind you put on it, and the more coal and gas fired and nuclear you take off it, the more fragile your grid becomes.
I mean, the UK seems to be going hell for leather in papering over our countryside and arable land with solar panels. I know a number of solar farms that I'd personally like to campaign against. But looking out the window today, we've had a nice week so far. I mean, basically, it's been one of the hottest Aprils for a long time. But looking out the window today, well, it's pretty murky out there. It's overcast. I mean, can solar work in the UK?
Solar's an absolutely insane technology for Britain. As you observe, we're quite a cloudy country. We're quite far north, so for almost 6 months of the year, you don't get very strong sunlight. But anyhow, there's this fundamental problem with renewables. Even though we've got quite a lot of what they call wind resource, it's the variability of wind that you can't control how much electricity it produces, and it's the fact that it has this quality that it makes the grid more fragile. So every new solar panel that's being put up, every new wind turbine, not only makes the grid more fragile, it makes us poorer too. It's a double whammy.
Do you think that we're now going to see, you probably might not be able to answer this, but politically speaking, looking at what's just happened in recent elections, it's quite clear that, at least if you're going to take a snapshot of public opinion right now, the support is very much behind Reform UK, who want to abolish net zero. Do you think politically we're going to start seeing a lot of pressure now on the government to step back a little bit from Ed Miliband's, or Ed Zero, as I like to call him, zealousy?
I think the truth is that Keir Starmer, whatever his views might be, and I think he's a man with not many views on something like this, but he's totally trapped by the Climate Change Act, which was actually passed when Ed Miliband was Energy and Climate Secretary in 2008. And Section 2 of the Climate Change Act enshrines the net zero target. And to get rid of that, you have to repeal Section 2 of the Act. And I don't see this Parliament doing it. I think will be up for grabs at the next election, and very much so. And I think that in the political sphere, I think net zero is on its last legs. But I think it's going to be some time before Parliament will get round to repealing that bit of the Climate Change Act.
Yeah, I think it'll probably take a change in government. Rupert Darwell, thank you ever so much. We're going to take a short break now. When I come back, we're going to be discussing, among other things, VE Day events. Keep your stories coming in. I want to hear about your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. Let their memories live. Let their stories be told here, today, on this important anniversary. Everyone's story deserves to be listened to. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call or to send me a WhatsApp. 8722 to text. Remember to write the word talk before your message. I'm back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Alex Phillips with you until 1 o'clock today. And it is, of course, VE Day as events take place up and down the country. I want to hear your stories. I think it's so important to discuss this occasion. Joining me now is former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannett. Lord Dannett, thank you ever so much for being here with me today. First of all, let's start off about the importance of VE Day as a man who led the British Army.
Well, Alex, it is a very important day. It's a very important week. Of course, the actual VE Day is the 8th of May, which is Thursday. But the commemorations quite properly started today because it was just last evening, 80 years ago, that Field Marshal Montgomery took the surrender of all German forces in northwest Germany, Holland and Denmark. So quite properly, the celebrations began on the 5th because the news began to filter through that Montgomery had taken that surrender. So it's really important that this week, 80 years on, with just a few of those World War II veterans still with us, we can remember, we can celebrate, we can commemorate. And of course, back 80 years ago, the enthusiasm was instantaneous. This time it's a little bit more planned, but it's still important that we commemorate, we celebrate, we remember, and actually just while we've still got some of them with us, celebrate what those people, now very elderly, did for our values and our freedom 80 years ago.
Let's talk about today's military-related stories. First of all, the foiling of the Iranian terror attack apparently was just hours before some sort of ghoulishness was unleashed on the British soil. 5 have been detained over this plot. We don't have much information about what the target was, whether these people were connected to the Iranian state. Do you know anything more than I do about these particular arrests and this particular operation? And what do you think that really means? You know, what lessons are we to learn from this in terms of the threats we face on our own soil today?
Well, Alex, I think it's very interesting what happened over the last 24 hours in contrast to what happened 80 years ago. The nature of warfare has changed hugely, and we've got these terror type threats that we have to live with on a daily basis. I think the really significant thing is that our intelligence services, our counterintelligence services, were that good that they had got under the skin. They knew what these was certainly Iranian people were planning to do, and our security forces struck, arrested them and prevented what could have been an outrage. Now, we don't know exactly what the target was, but looking at the antipathy between Iran and Israel at the present moment, I think we can deduce, without being absolute geniuses, that it was probably some spectacular event against the Jewish community, an attack on a synagogue or some such, that was in the advanced stage of planning, and the security forces struck because their intelligence was so good. And I think we should celebrate MI5, MI6, Special Branch, all the individuals who were involved for coming together and foiling what would have been a bloody attack that would have spoiled the celebrations and the commemorations that we are quite properly enjoying VE Day 80 years on.
Do you think it's about time that we prescribed the IRGC here in the UK, that is the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, essentially regarded as their sort of attack dog, their undercover agents and their mercenaries on foreign soil? Are we being a little bit too lenient when it comes to our approach to Iran?
Well, I think the government has been balancing up for some time the advantages or disadvantages of prescribing the IRGC. The reason not to do so is that the UK has managed to keep some form of diplomatic engagement with Iran, which most other countries, certainly the United States, have lost. And therefore the UK government has been able to be a bit of a back channel, if you like, to communicate with the Iranians. I think the fear is that if we prescribe this group, and we probably should, but the fear is that if we do, then that back channel will be closed down and it'll be more difficult for the West to have any form of communication with Iran. I think on balance, frankly, the threat from this group, and as you say, it's their attack dogs. They are the militant wing and have been for years of the Iranian regime. I think the time has come to prescribe them. And if indeed it's confirmed that this terror attack that's just been foiled was the work of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, then they should be prescribed, and now.
I want to talk now about, in the same breath that we are having our own VE Day events up and down the country the next few days, Russia are due to have their own military, what would you call it, military parade in commemoration of the end of the Second World War. There are some people who suggest that this would be a viable target to make a point for Ukraine. Do you think that that is something that Zelensky or Zelensky's allies should be considering?
Well, of course, it's a tempting target. I think it's a tempting target too far, to be honest. Of course, in Red Square will be a large number of Russian soldiers, a large number of Russian armoured vehicles. It would be very tempting to fire some kind of missiles in and amongst them. I think that would be a huge provocation. And I think that's, although as tempting as it is, I don't think that would be the right thing to do. After all, there'll be celebrations and commemorations that other countries, Western European countries, will be holding. And, well, the Russians could do the same to us. So I think warfare is not something where all the gloves are off all the time. There has to be some kind of regulation, some kind of humanity. And I think to disrupt and cause casualties to the Russian parade on the 9th of May, bearing in mind in what they call the Great Patriotic War, they lost 20 million people. And although we are at enmity, if you like, with the Russians now, back in 1939, 1945, the Grand Alliance was the Soviet Union, the United States, America, and Great Britain. So we were fighting side by side against a common enemy. And I think even though we thoroughly disagree with what Russia is doing now in its attack on Ukraine, I think we need to respect the past and respect their parade on the 9th of May, remembering that they lost 20 million in the common fight against fascism and Nazism, which we're now celebrating 80 years on.
Lord Dannatt, thank you ever so much, and thank you so much for joining me on this historic day. As on Bank Holiday Monday, we have events and services up and down the country to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Now, I'm going to go into some of your messages, and I want your calls to keep coming in because lots of you have been sharing your stories with me. I have an enduring memory of a photo, I hope my sister still has it, of a tall, handsome man in North Africa with one foot on the wheel arch of a Landy and his arm around a cute little nurse that would soon become his wife, both looking so proud. Without them and their efforts, I wouldn't be here. Maybe none of us, lest we forget. Someone says, hi Alex, my name is Ernest. I'm 68, I've always hated it. There wasn't anyone else called it. In school it was like that song by Johnny Cash, A Boy Named Sue. I was always bullied over it and laughed at. But a few years ago my nephew showed me a photo of a man in a muddy trench half full of water, and I said to him, who's that? And he said, that's your father's father. I never knew my grandfather. He said he was killed in the war, and that's who you were named after. And now I say my name with pride, and I have it on my business cards. Ernest. My mother and aunt grew up in a lovely 3-storey house in Forest Gate. One night early in the war, my grandparents went out for the evening, leaving my mother with a neighbour. That night was the first night that the Nazis bombed London. Hearing the alarms, my grandparents rushed back, only to find their street had been bombed and had been blocked off by the police. They had no idea if my mother and her sister had survived until the following morning. Their house survived that night, but was later bombed, and all that were left were a couple of glass statues. Incredible stories. Let's speak now to Robert, who's in Harrow. Hello there, Robert.
Hello there. Excuse me.
That's all right.
I just want to share my dad's story.
Yes, please do.
All right. Basically, he joined in 1936. He joined the Middlesex Middlesex Regiment. Lied about his age to get in.
Wow.
And was accepted. He then went on to carry on serving with the Middlesex Regiment right up until Dunkirk. He was on the beaches at Dunkirk. And his story is he got off once onto a boat that was then sunk, went back to the beaches, and then managed to get onto another ship that brought him to the UK. In the meantime, he'd met my future, my mother basically, and her brother was in the 1st Airborne, my Uncle Sid. So he was one of the first parachute troopers in the UK. He then talked to my brother into joining the Ox and Bucks, the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Regiment, and then went back on D-Day with the Ox and Bucks. He was actually a machine gunner, so in the Middlesex he was using a Vickers machine gun, and I believe in the Ox and Bucks he would have been a Bren gunner on a light carrier. I think we're still trying to trace the history of them. We think he was part of 30 Corps that then went up to try and punch through Arnhem. Funny enough, my uncle Sid was actually at Arnhem and sort of had a little needle with my dad, but they didn't quite make it there on the day. My uncle Sid swam the Rhine to get out of Arnhem, basically back to our side. And my father finished the Second World War, or finished the war, in a thing called T-Force, which was obviously known as Task Force. There is a book about it out there, which was a unit that was set up, a joint American-British unit that was set up to go behind lines and snatch German scientists before the Russians got to them.
Wow.
So he had a bit of an action-filled World War II.
Yeah, he did. It really did, didn't he? Do you know, it's amazing when you think about D-Day, the chaos, the commotion, the amount of noise, the bombings, the fatalities, the bravery, just so incredible that it's impossible to imagine what it must have been like to live through those scenes. And one thing that always sends a shiver down my spine when he spoke about the boats picking up our soldiers, fishermen, young people, the little boys with their dads, ordinary people going out, fleets of our fishing boats going over to France in the middle of a war, through those bombs, through the buzzing of the military aircraft, to get as many lives out as possible. And you suddenly remember, this is what Britain's about. This is the backbone of our society. These are our brilliant men and women who, when it comes to crisis, they rise to the challenge. Your story is beautiful, Robert. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Right, you know what to do. You've got to call me up, 0344 499 1000. I want to hear your stories, because that's what we're focusing on after this next break. Keep the messages coming in, keep the WhatsApps coming in, keep the voice notes coming in. We're going to do as many as possible, because how privileged and what an honour it is to be able to sit in this chair today and invite you all to tell the nation about your family's part that they played in our country's history. Right, I'm back after this.
I think my message would be, you sound exactly like the people that go out and abuse. To downgrade, to dismiss, and it was just such a scummy comment. I honestly have no words for how degrading that is.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. Right, I'm going to read some of your messages, and then there's I think a special caller coming up very shortly. Morning, Alex, says Rob in London. Great show. My grandfather was a captain on a minesweeper, a very dangerous job. He was badly gassed and his life was shortened due to dying of lung cancer at 68. I vaguely remember him smoking his pipe when I was very young. I remember my granddad smoking a pipe as well. Morning, Alex. My uncle worked on the bridge over the River Kwai. He left a little book about how he was treated so very badly, but he never spoke about it. He came back with recurrent malaria. When my aunt met him at the station, she didn't recognise him. He was so thin. That's Jane. I remember my granddad very occasionally talking about his time in World War II. He was shot in the leg and taken prisoner and marched across Germany to a prisoner of war camp in Poland. He managed to escape and hid in a Polish family's barn for a few months before being recaptured. He always remembered the kindness of that Polish family, but would never speak of his time in the camp. My nana would always warn us against asking him. He had a tattoo of his prisoner number on his arm, which he would always cover up. But occasionally I caught it, and also the bullet wound scar on his leg. I'm glad he's not here to see where Europe is right now. That's Louise in Tyne Wear. Alex, I want to pay tribute to my amazing dad, who flew 33 Lancaster missions as a flight engineer and co-pilot from the age of only 18. At age 15, he was in hospital for 6 months with a burst appendix, but eagerly signed up to the RAF. Luckily, he made it through to tell the tales and live a long, accomplished life. He went on to build his own business, providing jobs for many others. Well done, and thank you, Dad. The best of British, forever loved and missed. That's Cal from Bedford. Right, I think this next one's going to really get me going. This is Leslie in Gloucester, Leslie Phillips, who happens to be my mum. Hi, Mum.
Good morning, Alex.
Good morning. I want you to tell my grandma your mum's story.
It was very brief, actually. Her family grew up in Gloucester, and she went to work at the Gloucester Aircraft Factory as she sewed the fabric onto the wooden frames for the wings and the tail pieces of the aeroplanes that they were building. Whilst doing this job, there was a roar overhead. I can't tell you the date because I don't know it. A roar overhead, and everyone dived under their workbenches thinking that it was a German air raid. A couple of minutes later, the tannoy system sparked into life, and the general manager said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you can get out from under your workbenches now." That was our experimental plane carrying Frank Whittle's jet engine. And everybody cheered, and apparently they banged the benches with their tools, and there was just ecstasy in the factory. That was their contribution.
Oh, thank you, Mum. And that was my story from my grandma, the late Iris Wilcox. And thank you to her and all those other incredible women who didn't necessarily go and serve on the front lines, but were part of the war effort, working in the factories day and night, living in fear of attack. And what a proud, proud moment, that first jet engine in a British plane. That was my mum, Leslie, in Gloucester. I knew that would get me tearing up. Let's speak now to Anne, who's in Sussex. Hi there, Anne.
Hello, Alex. Thank you. You inspired me to ring. I wasn't going to. But I then thought about my father-in-law, who found talking about the war very difficult. But my son, as he got older, managed to get him to tell him what had happened. And he was out in the desert with Montgomery. Only what he had to do was to go out at night, and as well as the day, but I know at night, with a Gurkha, and they used to crawl through the desert, and when they came across the enemy, the Gurkhas, who were very wise, knew what to do as well, and they would check their boots because the enemy laced their boots differently. So you can imagine it wasn't the best experiences of what they may have had to do, would have had to do. And he did find, as many veterans I knew, Remembrance Day, the war, very hard to cope with. And what I thought later, I met a woman who said, I drove Montgomery around, during the war. And I thought, lucky you. But the real heroes who really laid their lives on the line often never got mentioned.
Exactly, Anna. And, what a wonderful thing to think as well when, we live in such a divided society today. And yet, during the Second World War, men and women from around the world were serving in completely different countries, alongside men and women from completely different cultures, and pulling together in order to try and defeat evil. There are such horrible, tragic tales and memories that some people would much rather forget, least of all talk about it, but then such positive stories of humanity as well.
Alex, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, my darling.
It's only that only last year I discovered who my father was, and he was Canadian, and he'd come over, as they did from all of our Commonwealth countries, didn't they? Mm. Because they cared about what happened here in the UK and what was happening with the war, and that I discovered he was a war hero. But what it meant is what you've just said, the coming together of people who didn't know each other, who actually... I had a young man here in Burgess Hill, I learned a few years ago, who was 23, who came from Belgium, and his Spitfire crashed in Burgess Hill. And I didn't know his story until older people told me. And it's that people suddenly got out of their comfortable homes, or maybe not so comfortable, to come to fight for peace. And they were fighting for the Jewish people, for all the people who were voiceless.
Yeah.
And today we have people saying none of it was true.
Oh, God, it disgusts me when people do that. And it disgusts me as well when people just pay sort of lip service and sort of symbolism to this event rather than doing what we're doing and really, really remembering it and talking about it and understanding palpably its significance. And thank you ever so much. What a wonderful story as well about only just last year discovering your dad was a Canadian war hero. Well, I think we've got just enough time to speak to Georgina, who's in London. Good morning, Georgina.
Good morning, my darling. You look amazing. I just want to say a quick word. I feel an immense sense of pride seeing all these Union Jack flags throughout London. We have an immense debt of gratitude for all these real heroes, our veterans who fought, and those who sadly died for our freedom of speech, our freedom of movement, our freedom of choice, and our freedom of thought. Long may these heroes be remembered, and may we all try to live up to have their pride for this, our country. They made the ultimate sacrifice.
They really did, and it's why we call them the greatest generation. Their bravery. I mean, the stories coming in. I'm reading so many stories of someone being 15, 16, 17, 18, wanting to get involved, wanting to fight with that tenacity and that mettle, that sort of passion and that pride burning inside them. And you just think, blimey, if you could bottle that and distribute it through schools and universities around this country, how much better our nation may be. That was Georgina in London. Let's do a few of your messages before we go to break. Hi there, Alex. My grandfather served in the Solomon Islands, New Guinea and Darwin in World War II. He never liked to talk about it. He returned a different man. Shock therapy. Morning, Alex. Both my grandfathers, who were Polish, were drafted into the Red Army and spent Christmas Eve together in Siberia, breaking the little bread ration they had between them to celebrate. Years later, my father was looking for accommodation in Birmingham and met my mother. Before he could move in as a lodger, he had to meet her parents. My two grandfathers looked at each other in shock. They hadn't seen each other since that Christmas Eve all those years earlier. That was Tanya in London. Keep those messages coming in. 0344499 1000, the number to call. And the same number to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note. 87222, the number to text. Remember to write talk before your message. Going to take a short break now, but lots more news and lots more of your memories to come. This is Alex Phillips on the home of Common Sense. I'm with you until 1. See you after this.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Well, it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right. A woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. If you want to fight for Remain, vote Labour. Now, there are some who say we don't need Brexit to work. We need to reverse it. I couldn't disagree more. Day after day, there are new allegations of sleaze, of favours, of privileged access. And it's all very well the Prime Minister saying, well, say now, well, I'm paying for it.
You've decided to repay £6,000 worth of gifts.
Lord Ali is facing an investigation. I wonder how concerned you are that your biggest donor was not fully transparent.
Are you saying you made a mistake?
It was right for me to make those repayments. Thank you. Of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner, but don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around. I'm anti-Trump. I would like to send my warmest congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is...
Hello, welcome back to the show. I've managed to pull myself together again. Honestly, I was sitting there and I had tears rolling down my cheeks. I cannot tell you what it does to me to hear these stories, to make it so palpably real. It's so hard to imagine us, me, you, your neighbours, living through what people in Britain lived through 80 years ago. Bombs being dropped on the streets, being sent off to far-flung corners of the globe to fight in nations that no one had ever visited before. This wasn't an era of great global travel. You know, most people who ended up going to fight in, wherever it may be, the Solomon Islands, Egypt, you know, Italy, they would never have dreamt of going to these places before. The will, the grit of ordinary men and women, whether they were serving abroad or whether they were part of the war effort back at home. The story I heard earlier of someone's father who had to cycle to map out where all the bombs had hit, and when the doodlebugs came, had to dive into the gutter. That was the only source of protection. Coming back to find your whole street has been razed to the ground. It's so hard to even begin to put ourselves in that situation. And it makes us ask questions of whether we could do it, whether we have the guts and the gall to stand up and fight for this nation. And I just hope in sharing these stories today and keeping those memories alive, it actually lights that fire back in our bellies. And it gives us hope, actually, that when faced with crisis, we can and we will rise to the challenge, because this is a great nation. We are the sons and the daughters, the grandsons and the granddaughters of those men and women who fought to protect this country and freedom. Right, let's go back to some news, shall we? I'm joined now by Alex Wilson AM, Reform UK London Assembly member. Hello there, Alex.
Morning, Alex. Great to be here.
It would be remiss of me if I didn't ask you, before we go on to talk about politics, if you have a family story from World War II you'd like to share with us.
Not particularly, or not directly related to my family as such, but I did grow up, I was born and grew up in a military town, Colchester, and I've always had nothing but the utmost admiration and respect for everyone who served in our armed forces, and I will certainly be watching all the events later today, and also on VE Day itself, I'll be at the main event in London to commemorate that as well. So huge respect, thanks, gratitude, admiration for everybody who served in World War I and World War II and everything subsequently, protecting our country, putting their lives on the line. Absolute heroes, every single one of them.
Hear, hear. Now, let's talk about politics. And I want to talk about, first of all, let's talk about the comments from Louise Haigh, former Cabinet Minister for Transport, her of the multiple phones, who, well, ended up not continuing to serve in Cabinet. She thinks that the approach of the Labour Party has been wrong. The reason that Reform has done so well in the recent local elections is because, well, it seems to me the Labour Party haven't been left-wing enough for her taste. She wants the party to raise taxes to fend off the forces of Farage. I'm sure that sort of raises a bit of a chuckle in you. Fantastic election results, may I just say. But were they just a flash in the pan? Can Labour now address Reform and begin to get some territory back, so to speak?
Well, firstly, you're absolutely right. They were fantastic local election results. We knew there was the opportunity for us to do quite well in a number of places that had elections, but to actually take outright control of 10 county councils, 2 combined authority mayors, and of course the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, which, let's not remember, that was one of Labour's safest seats in the country. The majority that they were defending in that seat was bigger than the majority Keir Starmer has in his own constituency in Holborn and St Pancras. That's the scale of the challenge that we were up against, and we smashed it. And we did it through a lot of hard work. The branch structure that's been establishing itself since the general election, it's getting people organised on the ground. That was of huge help in getting candidates nominated, and then obviously being able to fight localised campaigns, because that's the one thing that we hadn't really got beforehand. The general election, we did what we thought at the time was pretty well, but that was largely driven by the air war, the return of Nigel, the kind of interest on social media and so on that came from that. But that was already baked in. To make further progress, it's all about what we do on the ground. That's what we've been doing since with the branches, and that's obviously fed very much into these local elections now. For Labour, though, to respond, I mean, look, it's easy to kind of follow the saying, you shouldn't really interrupt your enemies while they're making mistakes. But as we're on, we might as well have a chat about it. For them to respond by following Lou Haigh's advice and raising taxes and tacking further to the left seems a very strange kind of prescription, because let's not forget, one of the reasons that people were so angry with both the Conservatives before the general election and Labour now in the last 9 months is because both of those parties have put up tax relentlessly. The Conservatives had at the time delivered the highest tax burden since the war. That's one of the reasons I left that party. And Labour have obviously continued that on steroids. And the fact that they're hitting pensioners, farmers, small businesses through the national insurance rise, and then to think that the answer to respond to that should then be to directly hit people in their pay packets through higher income tax, national insurance, and raising VAT, absolutely crazy. But if that's the route that Labour want to go down, then certainly this set of elections won't be a flash in the pan. Reform will definitely be parking its tanks. We are parking our tanks on Labour's lawn as the challenger to this terrible government. And next year's local elections and the year after, and then when we get round to the general election, those will all see similar results if the Labour Party chooses to go down that path.
Now, in the wake of those impressive Reform results, you now have over 1,000 councillors up and down the country, men and women, who may never have been elected to local government before, who suddenly have a job to do on behalf of a party who's never been given that job. one of the things that Nigel Farage has said he wants to see happen locally, in line with the party's pledges, is to halt asylum seekers being housed in reform-run areas. And in order to do so, the party is prepared to go to court. The big problem here, though, Alex, is who's paying for those legal bills?
Yeah, well, ultimately, we're all paying for the asylum crisis and the fact that we have thousands and thousands of undocumented young males crossing the channel week on week. We've had more, I think it'll be 40% more so far this year than at the equivalent point in last year. That's costing the taxpayer a huge amount of money. So, one way or the other, tackling the asylum system and the craziness that we have and the soft touch that we've become is going to cost a bit of money. But what we need to do is get on top of this, put pressure on the government. Look, Keir Starmer talks about smashing the gangs. The only thing he's smashed so far is the record and his own credibility. So we want to make sure we can do what we can. And look, there are certain powers that county councils may or may not have, and we'll find that out as we're forming these administrations, and we'll use whatever levers we can to try and contribute to getting on top of this problem, because it is the number one issue that a lot of people are so thoroughly fed up. Again,
it's a difficulty, though, that when it comes to local election spending, about 3/4 of the budget is already sort of allocated by central government. And then when it comes to any other coins down the back of the sofa, we know that authorities up and down the country are absolutely cash-strapped. There's no room for manoeuvre. I mean, does the party actually have any understanding of how much money there might be to play with, how much court cases might cost, and whether this could even be paid for? Or could there be an egg-on-face situation when all of a sudden this sort of landmark pledge, this sort of centrepiece of reforms offering at local government, might be something that has to be quietly binned?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of the responsibilities and the spending of councils, particularly county councils, are set out. It's statutory. It's things that we have to do, and there isn't any sort of flexibility or wriggle room. You're absolutely right on that. But that doesn't mean that there is not waste that can be found. In the run-up to these elections, the party submitted, I think, in the region of 3,000 FOI requests, and has identified through that the kind of first wave of all these different waste and things that we can get on top of, and that's going to be the approach going forward. When you're right, we haven't got a track record of running things in local government yet, because we haven't had the opportunity. But we've got a lot of people who have just been elected who've got real positive track records in other areas, in their businesses, in charities that they've worked in, working in public services. And they're going to bring that real-world experience and that judgment and that oversight. That's what they're going to do to try and focus on this, zero down on the waste, and then we can redirect those that funding to the services that we all need and depend on.
Do you anticipate it being a bumpy ride on this learning curve? Because it's a very different world to go into if you've never served on a council before, learning the ropes and having to sort of, hit the ground running. And I don't know whether Reform anticipated the results that they got, or, expected to actually be running whole councils from a position of, largely zero experience.
Well, we do have a few councillors now who have already served previously, and I served as a councillor and cabinet member in a previous life for a previous party, and those of us that have got some experience, I'm sure, will be speaking very closely to our new councillors to make sure that they can get to grips with things properly. It will be a learning curve, but these councillors, near enough 700 councillors that were elected on Thursday, they've been given a very strong mandate from their constituents, and they will stand up to be that voice of common sense in their community, work hard for the people that have elected them, and in 4 years' time, then their electorate will have the opportunity to judge them. That's how democracy works. Unlike in some parts of the country where the councils were supposed to have elections. These elections were a great success for us, but there are 5.5 million people who had their right to vote taken away from them. Combination of central government and the local council leaders conspiring to postpone those elections. Those people, they're hiding from the electorate. We're absolutely proud of the fact we've got the mandate we have from the people that voted on Thursday. We're not going to hide from anyone. We're going to deliver and work very, very hard to make sure that happens.
Talking about deliver, it turns out that lots of illegal migrants in the UK are basically working in delivery jobs. This doesn't surprise me at all. We've all seen it, haven't we? But asylum seekers being housed in hotels who are getting their pocket money from us, the taxpayer, who are getting their food, their accommodation. Some of them are getting driving lessons and football tickets and Lord knows what, are actually all working. A huge amount of them are going out and delivering takeaways and the like. A resident based in a London hotel home to hundreds of male asylum seekers said nearly all the hotel's inhabitants were working as self-employed couriers. to cover their Channel crossings debts. I mean, this to me is absolutely astonishing. This clearly isn't people who are, you know, desperately needing fleeing war, but are actually having a great old time, earning money, living at our expense in the sort of hotels that most people would not be able to afford to stay in day after day, night after night. What would Reform be doing about that?
Yeah, I've seen different research, different figures suggesting that either sort of 1 in 5 or 2 in 5 of delivery drivers are actually working in this way. So what's happening is, you know, somebody legitimate gets registered, gets on the, you know, whichever the platform it is that is you know, running these operations, but then they're effectively subletting their bike, their you know, sort of substitute driver, and then these people are unvetted, undocumented, we don't know who they are, and then they're turning up at people's addresses, and the photo on the app doesn't match what the person looks like, and it's you know, intimidating, and you know, vulnerable people you know, being put at risk of not actually, you know, knowing who it is that's delivering their food. One of the
So would Reform go after the companies? Would Reform go after the big sort of named companies who are behind this?
I think you've got to think about that, because in the same way as yeah, if you're a taxi driver or, you know, private hire vehicle driver, you have to be the one that's registered, but the delivery drivers don't. So I think we need to tighten up that loophole, absolutely, because yeah, if you've got people visiting people's addresses, which is what basically they're doing, you need to be able to track who it is and make sure that it's all above board. But fundamentally, we have to get a grip on the asylum system in the first place. We have to, you know, make it much less attractive for people to come here, cross the channel on those boats. You mentioned the long list of you know, handouts that these people are getting. One you didn't mention is, you know, medical treatment and even dentistry. I mean, have you know, your viewers, how many of your viewers will have struggled to get NHS dentistry? You know, lots of them will have done, and yet, you know, these people can come across on the channel, you know, illegally, and they get it all handed to them on a plate. It's got to stop.
And you're a London Assembly member. I'm pretty sure there must be asylum hotels in your constituency. Are you going to be pushing to have some sort of judicial review?
Well, as an Assembly member, I mean, the Assembly itself doesn't really have any great power. All the power that's you know, from the Greater London Authority, it's very much so. Kind of concentrated in the mayor's hands. So what I will do and what I can do and what I have been doing and will continue to do is keep asking questions of the mayor and trying to put pressure on, using the position I have as a platform. But ultimately, you know, I'm not actually in a position to make any great decisions or kind of influence in that way. But no, certainly keep asking the questions, fighting the good fight. One thing that we had back in November last year, so the Assembly did discuss a motion which was a Labour-led motion. Obviously, the Lib Dems, the Greens backed it. Conservatives sat on their hands, didn't want to engage. They abstained. But this was about giving free travel to asylum seekers across London, free bus travel. And I saw reports over the weekend that it looks like the mayor is actually considering, you know, going along with that. So I need to look into that and keep banging the drum against that. I was the only member to vote and speak against that. But so I am using the platform I've got to talk about these issues. But ultimately, as far as London is concerned, what Sadiq says goes, unfortunately.
Alex Wilson, Reform UK, London Assembly member, thank you ever so much. You know, it's funny, isn't it? This is the problem. When you look at how many layers of bureaucracy we have in the United Kingdom, OK? So if you take into consideration the number of lords, which is well over 1,000, the number of MPs nudging up to 700, might even be more than 700, I don't know. Then you've got the Welsh Assembly, got the Northern Ireland Assembly, got the Scottish Government, you've then got the London Assembly, then you've got your local authorities. We've got more politicians in this blimmin' country than we got people. And so you often wonder when you're digging around in the weeds to try and find where the buck should stop, who's going to actually put their head on the guillotine for the chop. I mean, it's incredibly hard to unpick all of this stuff. Right, let's go back to calls, shall we? Because Laurie is on the phone for Merseyside. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Alex. I recall my father telling of his landing in the Dunkirk landings on the beaches and talking about a lovely place called Aramond. But preceding this, he talked of the colour of the sea, changing from being its normal shade to being blood red as his fellow sailors died as they landed. Some of the time we didn't always believe him because he was always very jolly. But this has now brought it all home, how brave he was.
It's so hard to even picture a scene like that. And you know, when you talk about him being so jolly, it's amazing actually. So many of us who've had the pleasure of speaking to relatives who served during the Second World War, despite the harrowing tales, what really often does come across is a great positivity, a sort of not only a resolve but an optimism that they all shared.
He was brave, and as he left the Navy, he joined the Fire Brigade in Liverpool. And I can remember him rescuing people from the large store in Liverpool that went on fire, bins, and he was carrying people down a ladder as the flames came out of the old store. He was a brave man, and I miss my aunt.
Oh, Laurie. Oh, he sounds like a wonderful man. And so important that you talk about his story, that you share. What was his name, my darling?
Alf.
Alf.
Jump was his surname.
Oh.
I'm sure colleagues may remember that name.
Oh, Alf, well, we're remembering you today and your contribution to saving freedom and bringing peace to this country. And how impossible to imagine being in a situation as brutal, as bloody, as chaotic, as frightening as D-Day. And that mental image of the waters of the sea changing from the stony grey of the Channel into a sea of red, with all those lives lost, all of those brave young men, that both who were serving and those who came across in little fishing vessels to save as many lives as possible. Laurie, thank you ever so much, and thank you so much to Alf. Right, we're going to take a short break now. I want your stories to keep coming through. There's loads more messages here for me to read. In fact, let's do a couple of messages before I go to break, because otherwise I won't get a chance to do them all. I want to get through as many as possible. During World War II, my dad was a captain in charge of 35 lorries full of ammunition for the front line. Once going through Holland, they got lost and decided they were going the wrong way. The solution was to find a field, and when the last lorry was in, to drive out again and retrace their route. That's from Terry. Thank you, Alex, for highlighting the generation who gave their todays for our tomorrows. In the 60s, when at secondary school, I remember in our annual Remembrance Day assembly that our metalwork teacher, who was a Japanese prisoner of war and worked on the horrific Burma Road, would weep when the school band played The Last Post. I'm now in my 70s. It's Malcolm, Hampshire. Morning, Alex. If we are to preserve our culture, our way of life, our history for no other reason, let it be because those who fought to protect it for their future generations, us and our children, deserve it. It's Michael in Northumberland. Keep your messages coming in. 03444 99 1000 is the number to call if you're comfortable sharing your family's story about the Second World War. You can give my producers a call now and they will call you back when we have our next chance to talk to you. You can also use that number to leave me a voice note on WhatsApp or indeed send me a message, 87222. Remember to write the word talk before you text. Okay, taking a short break now. We're going to be talking about this foiled massive Iranian terror plot after that, and more of your memories, or your family's memories from the Second World War. Back after this.
I think the electorate all over the world are increasingly concerned and worried that government is just a gravy train. People arrive in government to make money rather than to actually run things and run things well and efficiently.
But how much more evidence do you need as a government to actually realise this is a problem for the electorate? They are saying we have huge problems with grooming gangs in this country. The government has dropped the national inquiry into those grooming gangs because they are frightened of the feedback or the kickback that they'll get.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Tell you what, guys, I need these advert breaks today. The calls and messages coming in on the E-Day, it's just... Gosh, I mean, I'm a blubberer at the best of times. Anyone who knows me will tell you that doesn't take a lot for the old waterworks to get going. But I just, it's overwhelming, the stories that I'm hearing today. So do keep them coming in. I think it's so important. Right, let's go back to some news because there has been a massive, imminent terror attack on British soil that has been foiled. It's a suspected Iranian terror attack just hours away from being realised. 5 men, including 4 Iranian nationals, were arrested at locations across England on Saturday in what the Home Secretary described as one of the biggest counter-terror operations in recent years. The authorities feared an attack on specific premises, which so far have not been named, was imminent. Apparently they've been given support, but the location for security reasons is not being disclosed to the police. We know that 4 of these nationals were from Iran. A 5th, we don't yet know his identity. Arrests in Swindon, London, Rochdale, and we know that these men were Iranians, but we don't yet know whether they had direct links to the Iranian state. What is going on? What can we glean from this, thank goodness, 11th hour interception from brilliant intelligence services, special forces and terrorist police? Well, someone who might be able to cast some light on this is Barak Sina. He's an associate research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, and Barak recently did a report for the Henry Jackson Society titled The Long Arm of Tehran, Why the UK Should Ban the IRGC. Barak, thank you so much for joining us. We don't have a lot of information. Not much has been disclosed about who these people are. We know that 4 of the 5 were Iranian nationals. We don't know what the target was. We don't know what the motivation was, or at least I don't. What has your been reaction to this interception? I mean, first of all, thank goodness this was intercepted. But do you think this could link directly back to the Iranian state?
First of all, Alex, thank you so much for having me. The modus operandi of the Iranian regime is to use its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, to conduct attacks for it across its borders, whether it be in the Middle East, to work closely with Iranian proxies like the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah. And this is all about projecting Iranian power and exporting the Iranian Revolution, which has been the mission statement of Iran since its revolution in 1979. The problem that we have here in the UK is that for some strange reason, we refuse to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organization, even though every other country has done so. So it leads to a bit of a strange landscape where, on one hand, we sanction the IRGC for its activities abroad, but we don't want to prescribe them a terrorist organization at home. Now, the IRGC has conducted multiple attacks, or multiple attacks have been foiled across Europe, whereby the Iranian regime commands the IRGC to connect with local criminal gangs and drug operatives across Europe in order to sponsor them and conduct attacks. The same thing happened here in the UK, and thankfully, as you said, it was foiled.
I mean, do you think that we don't have any more information on this? If it was a sort of long arm of Tehran conducting attacks on our soil, would they lay claim to it, or would they rather the British believe that this might have been a religiously motivated terror attack?
Well, two things. Number one, you're quite right for asking that question. Iran would naturally deny it. Iran tends to deny its foreign acts of terrorism, even though our security services know better. And naturally, one of the reasons why Iran doesn't want to take credit for its actions is because it doesn't want to be prescribed. We have a huge problem in this country in that our prevent counterterrorism strategy is focused on Sunni Salafi radicalization, but we don't have any counterterrorism strategy towards terrorism and extremism fostered by the Shia, which is Iran. Iran is Shia. And so when Iran is aligning itself with homegrown criminal gangs, the question we have to ask is, how does it foster radicalization more broadly in the UK? And our security services are blind to this.
How often do you think our security services are foiling such attacks? I mean, it sounds to me like we were a whisker away from atrocity being committed on our soil. What is the current threat level against the UK?
Look, the head of MI5 said that over 20 attacks have been foiled. Now, he said this a number of months ago. Who knows how many attacks have been foiled since? And the reason why it's not mentioned is simply because, the British state wants to maintain diplomatic relations. They want to have engagement with Iran. And so the argument put forth is, look, bite your tongue, deal with terrorism threats in an understated manner, in order that the UK government can have some kind of diplomatic relationship with the Iranian regime, which is a terrorist regime. And I think that that is a really flawed strategy to have, and it puts our security at risk.
We don't know anything about these particular men, but I must admit, when I read the story, I wanted to know whether we knew that they were present on our soil, whether these are people who came in, who have ordinary jobs and visas and a right to be here, or whether some of these people might have been smuggled into the country by the illegal routes. How much of a risk are those routes? Are people coming in, particularly on small boats, with their connection to potential hostile regime and terrorist organisations?
Look, Alex, you're right that Iran can actually tap into immigrants coming into the UK that we don't know their background. We've not done extensive security background checks on them. But there's also the more explicit route, which has happened in the past, which is IRGC members who are connected with the highest levels of the Iranian state coming into the UK with a diplomatic visa. And they're able to coordinate with criminal gangs. So it doesn't have to be via the back door, it can be via the front door, and there's nothing you can do about it until it's about to happen imminently.
Wow, it's scary stuff. Barak Sina, Associate Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, thank you ever so much We're going to take a short break now. When we come back after the break, it's going to be all about VE Day. I'm going to read your messages. I'm going to be speaking to you on the phone. I want as many of you to come forward with your family stories as possible, and we will try and get through all of them. The number to call 0344 499 1000. That's charged at your normal network rate. You can use that number as well to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. You can text me 87222. Put talk before your message if you decide to do that. And when I come back, let's all sort of, share our stories. Share the stories, not our stories, but the stories of the generation that sacrificed so much, sacrificed there today for our tomorrow. Back after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Let's dive straight into some of your messages and then take your calls. This is, of course, 80th anniversary of VE Day, with events being taking place up and down the country. Thursday, of course, is the actual anniversary, but as we have a bank holiday today and the VE Day parade is in the process of taking place, I want to take this opportunity while I sit in the hot seat to share the stories of your relatives, your family legacy, your family's history, and the part that your loved ones played in the Second World War. Jay in Devon says both of my grandfathers fought during the Second World War. One landed on the beaches of Normandy in 1944. The other was a navigator for the RAF and was involved in many bombing raids above Germany. At one point when people went out, was it the Lancaster bomber, which is going to be part of the flypast? A beautiful thing, that aeroplane. Oh, I love it. Oh my God, it makes the hair stand on end. But there was a sort of adage that went out. I think it's about 1 in 3 never came back. I don't know what the numbers were, but when these people were going out on their bombing missions to defend this country, they didn't know whether they were going to be landing again. They didn't. Hi Alex, thank you for giving people the opportunity to speak of their pride in their loved ones who took part in the war for the freedoms we enjoy today. It certainly reminds us of how great Britain can be. That's Dan in Halifax. I do love Halifax, My granddad, Harry Adcock from Sheffield, he lied about his age. He joined the Royal Artillery at the age of 15 in 1936, a wee 15-year-old. When he was just 18, World War II broke out. As a child, I remarked on one of the tattoos on his arm, which was the crest of the Royal Artillery with the letters RA, NA around the crest in each of the 4 corners. The RA were there as the initials of his regiment to represent his sign-up to the Royal Artillery. The NA added after the war represented never again. Morning, Alex. I was injured in an ambush attack while serving in Northern Ireland. I'll never forget the older veterans that came round to see me while I was in hospital. The old war stories at what get you through. I can still walk and talk, but other lads of my age at the time never got to come home or were carrying worse injuries, far worse than my own. Thank you for your service. Alex, my grandparents' VE Day was bittersweet as my father was still fighting in Burma, the forgotten war. My father never said much about the war. As kids, we would watch John Wayne movies and say to my dad, I bet you never killed anyone. Of course, there was no response. But the one thing I do remember is his absolute admiration for the Gurkhas. He said you only got a good night's sleep when those guys were out on night patrol. Again, an amazing example of how people from all around the world came together. Different cultures, different languages, but all came together in strange and challenging environments to do what they could to fight for peace. Let's speak now to Kevin in Portsmouth. Hi there, Kevin.
Hello there. I thought I'd just recount my mum's story.
Yes.
She was 10 years old. Around the 75th anniversary, we had a good conversation with her about how much she remembered of VE Day, and she said it was one of the greatest and vivid memories of her young childhood. So basically, she told us all what happened. Yes, I guess it was a very, very happy day, and she just stopped.
Oh,
you could really hear.
Kevin, your line is that we're not getting this story, and it sounds really, really important. We're going to try and reconnect with you because I really want to hear that story. We're all on tenterhooks up and down the country waiting to listen, but the line was a bit fuzzy, so let's see if we can reconnect to you and hear that story the way it should be heard. While we do that, let's speak to Philippa, who's in Dorset. Hi, Philippa.
Hi, Alex. Lovely to see you all celebrating VE Day on its 80th anniversary. I wanted to share some stories of my grandparents. They never really spoke graphically about their experiences in the war. They used to tell us grandchildren about silly anecdotes. My grandfather actually was in North Africa with the Royal Air Force during the war, and he was a reluctant serviceman. He didn't want to fight in the war, but he went anyway because that was what was expected at the time. And he used to say sometimes he used to put a thread of rope up the back of his buttons on his tunic to do it up because they didn't have like needle and thread and things like that. And then my grandmother used to work for the Red Cross during the war in London during the Blitz, and she just said it was a horrendous time, but the American and Canadian soldiers were like really buoyant and kept everybody going. And my great-uncle was one of the first prisoners of war to come back to Carshalton just after the war. We've got some family cine-film of it somewhere. But, you know, they didn't, our grandparents didn't talk about the atrocities and the bad things that happened. And I wish I had talked to them about it because I'm a history teacher and I've taught about the First and Second World Wars, and it's really important to keep these memories alive and these impactful stories alive for future generations because, you know, God forbid we're ever going to be in a situation where there's going to be another world war where we're going to need some grit and some gumption to go back into situations and scenarios like our previous generations have. Yeah. But well done for celebrating it, and you know we're so grateful and so thankful for what that generation did for us. You know that we're not occupied by another country, and we do have freedom of speech, and we do have the ability to be really patriotic. And yes, we should bring all that back, and we should teach it in schools because it's so important.
It's so important. And you know, listening to you talk about your relatives, and it reminds me of my own grandparents, which they had their stories. They were always optimistic, always laughing. But when it came to the gnarliness, the nitty-gritty, the service that they contributed, all of a sudden there was a sort of gravitas and a sincerity and a silence, a sort of noble silence about it, totally at odds with today's generation of young people who everything's about them, everything's about how difficult life is. They're always one of life's victims. It's all so hard. When they do anything, they have to share every last little moment with the world to rapturous applaud. And you think of that generation who really did have massive stories to tell and kept it to themselves, with dignity, with discretion, with honour and with pride. How different from the individualistic, instant gratification, narcissistic culture we live in today, and the lessons that we learn just listening to these stories and listening to the resolve, the grit, the mettle, the integrity of our grandparents' generation. It is really quite something. Philippa, thank you so much for your call. We're going to take a short break now. When I come back, we're going to be going live to Buckingham Palace as veterans are set to join the King for a VE Day tea party. That's after this.
Powell has apologised for what she said on Friday night. I think she'd be mortified to hear that. And I know, having been in touch with Lucy last night, that she never wanted in any way to downplay, delegitimise or dismiss the experiences of victims of these appalling crimes. Now, I know that people say we should have a national inquiry. There have been a number of inquiries. I actually think actions are louder than words, and the one thing that we can work hard to deliver is justice for victims.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. If you haven't noticed, today is the start of a week of celebrations to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day, and all the action today is happening on the Mall down at Buckingham Palace. Let's go live to Talk correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald, who is there. Hello, Alicia.
Hi, Alex.
Well, talk us through what is going to be taking place today.
Yeah, so I'm obviously right outside Buckingham Palace, which is where the parade is set to kind of finish up. At the moment, it is just about to start. That's over at Parliament Square, towards where the Houses of Parliament are. And in about 15 or so minutes' time, we'll be hearing a read of Winston Churchill's famous speech from actor Timothy Spall, who actually, some of you might know, played Winston Churchill in The King's Speech. So very fitting person to actually conduct that at the moment. So all the way from Parliament Square. The procession will begin and it will come all the way down the Mall and then up to Buckingham Palace, where I am standing. Bands and about 1,300 members of the armed forces all taking part in this ceremony today. Just behind me, a little bit later, on the famous balcony of Buckingham Palace, we will see King Charles and Queen Camilla, and also Keir Starmer is expected to be attending this procession too. Not quite sure where he'll be, but I'll let you know if I see him.
Have you had much opportunity to go and speak to the public, who must be down there in their droves to watch the parade?
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely so busy. It's as busy as you can possibly imagine it to be. There was a few horses kind of passed by a tiny bit earlier, and the crowds were just absolutely massive. We managed to speak to a few of them. So much excitement as well. And people are here for all sorts of reasons. We spoke to people who are here because they have members of family who fought in the war. We have people here just because they really care about Britain. I mean, all sorts of reasons. And also some people who purely just came out of pure curiosity and just to kind of see what it's all about, who don't know an awful lot about it. So an awful lot of draw here from various different reasons, but definitely a massive turnout, and the turnout is only going to get bigger because where I'm stood at the moment, I mean, the parade hasn't even passed through and there are so many people here already.
And what marks this celebration as different to previous ones is the fact, I understand, that Ukrainian servicemen and women are going to be joining that parade as war once again rages in Europe.
Yes, and actually it was really interesting. Someone that we spoke to in the public actually referenced this, and she said that part of the reason she is here today is actually in support of Ukraine. And she mentioned that, you know, we had this victory 80 years ago, the reason that we're all here today, and she basically wants to see the same thing for Ukraine very soon. So definitely a lot of resonation here about other conflicts that are going on across the world, definitely not just all about previous ones, and that's definitely going to mean a lot to an awful lot of people here. And I think it's interesting because there's not just people from the UK here as well. I mean, there's so many tourists, either people who are here for personal reasons or here just for the pomp and pageantry, but definitely the resonation from other conflicts across the globe is definitely very prominent at this celebration today.
And it would be no British parade if it didn't culminate in a flypast. Tell us more information about when that's taking place.
Absolutely. So a little bit later we will have the Red Arrows doing their very traditional fly past. We'll have the Union Jack colours coming out of the back of them. I think pretty much most places in central London you'll be able to get a really, really good view, and I think also if you live somewhere nearish Heathrow Airport, I think they're going to be flying over there too. If not, of course, you can turn on your television. I'm sure you'll get to see it there. But that will be a very, very big and massive moment here today. Obviously, lots of people have come purely for that. I mean, it's quite a spectacle. Quite a spectacle seeing the Red Arrows in formation, doing such a cool and amazing stunt, I suppose. So that'll be happening in a couple of hours' time.
Oh, I cannot wait. I'm told that actually from the windows of Talk Towers at about 1:45 the military fly past will go down the River Thames and we get a brilliant view, so I'm going to stick around after work to watch that. Alicia, thank you ever so much. I do love military aircraft. You heard, I don't know if you were tuned in earlier, my mum telling the story of my grandma who used to sew the wings onto aeroplanes. Can you believe it? Back in the day, our fighter aircraft had canvases stretched open which were then painted, but it was women. It was women in the aircraft factories as men were out at what was the women. They used to have long needles in their mouths like this, sewing the wings on. She was so good, my grandma. She was sent to train up other people. And the story of the very first jet engine, Frank Whittle's jet engine, being put in one of their aeroplanes, and the thunderous noise as that plane went over and they all ran under the benches thinking it was a German air raid, and then the voice came over the tannoy saying, "Get out from your benches, ladies. That's our plane." But they bashed their tools on the... I just think of that, and I think of my grandma. You know, when I was a little kid, we always used to go to Fairford Air Show, and I still go every single year to this day. And she brought me up on the wonders of military aircraft and everyone's contribution in the Second World War. God bless that woman, Iris Wilcox. She was a force of nature, I'll tell you that much. Right, let's get some of your stories now. Let's speak to Catherine, who's in Aberdeen. Hi, Catherine.
Hi. Forgive me because I'm full of hay fever at the moment, but I had a great uncle, Uncle Hans. He was a Luftwaffe pilot, and he crashed in Dover. They grabbed him and they made him a prisoner of war, and he ended up being a test pilot for the RAF, And in his later years, he opened up a mechanic's garage, and every year, by clockwork, he would give quite a substantial donation to the Benevolent Fund.
Wow, so he was actually a German pilot,
yeah.
Luftwaffe.
Yeah, great Uncle Hans.
Uncle Hans. And then, what an amazing story. He's a prisoner of war, and then he's turned and he joins us as one of our test pilots, and then goes on to continue every year giving to the RAF Benevolent Fund.
One thing he did say, I always remember, he said this to me on my wedding day. He says, they lied to me. He says, they lied to a lot of us. I always remember that.
The Germans, you mean?
Yeah, because he was in Hitler Youth.
Yeah.
And a couple of years later, because obviously they were all very young when they were flying. And I think he was 17 or 18 when he was in the plane when it crashed.
It's funny because it's very easy to sort of think of war as two sides, the bad side and the good side, but so often the young people who are dragged into service, who are fighting in a war, don't necessarily have any choice when they're on the side of the aggressors, or indeed are swept up in propaganda that isn't giving them all of the information. And the number of lives that were lost on both sides, needlessly, you think about the scale of the Second World War, the wickedness of it. Oh, well, what a wonderful story about your Uncle Hans, Catherine. I really do like that. What a fascinating tale. Let's speak to Paula, who's in High Barnet. Hi, Paula.
Oh, hi. Hi, Alex. Hi, how are you? You okay?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. I love your show, by the way. You're feisty.
Oh, thank you.
So can I just tell you a little bit about I'm of Irish descent, and I only just recently found out within the last 5 years that my grandfather had fought in the Second World War. He was from the Republic of Ireland. And the reason why I only found out was because I think my family, who are on the Irish side, were ashamed. I did some digging. I don't know exactly which regiment, and I'm still looking into that. But I found the wedding certificate of my mum, and it said her dad was present, and he was a soldier. If I look at his birth certificate from Ireland, it says he was a labourer. So what happened was, as I said to my mum, he fought alongside the bigger enemy, alongside the old enemy, as far as an Irishman is concerned, to fight the bigger enemy, which, as we know who they are, the Nazis. So my mum has started to accept that. So I wanted to give a big shout out to the Irish. All of them, there was, I think, approximately 10,000 of them, maybe more, a little less. The Irish government only recently pardoned them, I think, within the last 20 years. But when my grandfather went back to live in the Republic after the war, he was denied, he was blacklisted, as were many Irish men and women who fought in the British, alongside, the British, in the British Army, sorry.
Wow.
So I wanted to give a big shout out to them because they count.
And then what was his name?
Michael Christopher Sweeney, and I'm so proud of him.
Oh,
absolutely very proud. And to this day, I've said to my mum, you should be proud of that. But they did keep it a secret for a long time.
Wow, when you think of going against what is your birth country's will, that you don't join this, you don't go and fight alongside the oldest enemy, Britain, and yet he was so motivated to want to fight what he believed was right, the bigger enemy, as you describe. When you just think of the guile and the guts to do something like that, Paula, you're absolutely right to remember him today, Michael Sweeney. What a wonderful story. Paula, thank you ever so much. Right, I have enough time to do a few messages. Lindsay in Norwich, my aunt worked at Bletchley Park as an office girl while she was alive. We took her back there. She told us which block she worked in. And when they received the messages, they had to put them in tubes, which went down a chute. She didn't know where they went. But when we took her, the guide was telling us, and that was when she found out they went to be decoded. Also at the time, she thought theirs was the only shift. She didn't realise that as one train took them back to their lodgings, another train was pulling in at another site at Bletchley, disgorging the next shift. She never told anyone, which her brother, my dad, couldn't believe until the Secrets Act on Bletchley was lifted. She never told anybody. She remembered seeing Church of Medicines many times as she visited the park often. Her name was Audrey Brooks. Audrey, you fantastic woman. My uncle Billy Phillips was at Dunkirk, but never spoke about it. My uncle George Hossack Redford volunteered to step in for a friend who didn't get back to the RAF base in time. He made it all the way to the landings, but crashed on the third attempt to land. Oh, and this is a fantastic one. Listen to this. My mum used to tell me of her and her friends on the beach in Torquay and hiding under their beach towels as the German bombers flew over them. Keep your messages, your stories coming in. We're going to take a short break now. When I come back, there's 1 more hour to go. We're going to dip our toes back into politics, and I have a whole section blocked off ready for you to tell your family's proud history and the role they played in World War II. I'll see you in just a moment.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Well, it is something that shouldn't be said. It is not right. A woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. I actually welcome the judgment because I think it gives real clarity. It allows those that have got to draw up guidance to be really clear about what that guidance should say. If you want to fight for Remain, vote Labour. Now, there are some who say we don't need Brexit to work. We need to reverse it. I couldn't disagree more. Day after day, there are new allegations of sleaze, of favours, of privileged access. And it's all very well the Prime Minister saying, well, say now, well, I'm paying for it.
You've decided to repay £6,000 worth of gifts.
Lord Ali is facing an investigation. I wonder how concerned you are that your biggest donor was not fully transparent.
Are you saying you made a mistake?
It was right for me to make those repayments. Thank you. Of course, I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner, but don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around. I'm anti-Trump. I would like to send my warmest congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. You are with Talk, the home of common sense, and today, the home of your memories, your family's stories, their legacy, their contribution to our history on the 80th anniversary of VE Day, which of course isn't until the 8th of May, but as there's going to be a parade through central London today, a military flypast. At the moment, the actor Timothy Spall is recounting the famous speech made by Winston Churchill during the Second World War. It sends shivers up and down your spine. And it's so easy, especially the longer you get away from an event and the fewer people who are still alive today who can tell us firsthand of what happened in the Second World War. It's so easy to just let these things become nothing more than the printed words in a history book, which is why I want to invite you today to share your family stories. There have been amazing, amazing tales so far. It's really brought it home. The amount of times I've cried today, I'm not going to be able to cry for another year, I'm sure. If you want to pay testament to your relatives, your grandma, your granddad, your mother, your father, your great-grandparents, great-uncles, aunts, whoever it may be, let their stories be heard. 03444 1000 is the number to call. You can also send me a WhatsApp on that number, or you can send me a text message, 87222. If you do that, Right talk before your message. I'm joined in the studio now by Matthew Larzer, who, of course, is a former Labour Party advisor.
Good afternoon,
Let's
Alex.
do a touch of politics. Because a really interesting take on how to respond to those local election results by Louise Haigh, former Transport Minister, in the Times today. Now, you would think if you were the Labour Party, looking at the fact that projected vote share reform got 30%, who took that constituency in Runcorn with a bigger majority than Sir Keir Starmer enjoys in his own constituency, you would think they're thinking, oh my goodness, we're going to have to address this. And she says, yes, you are. And the right approach to take would be to increase taxes in order to pay to do even more. And Sir Keir Starmer has said, well, we need to go faster, harder, with more confidence. Do you think that is the direction of travel he's going to take?
No. I mean, I think, but what I do think is really worrying for Keir Starmer is that not just Lou Hay, but you've got various other people popping their heads up because with their hot takes, as it were, on the results on Friday from Thursday's votes. And I think what's interesting is you've got all these different, you've got people on the right of the party popping up. Basically, is the fact that they are making a play for the leadership of their part of the Labour family. So Lou Hay is quite obviously making her play to be the leader, come back after she had to leave the cabinet, having been caught not having disclosed a conviction about a mobile phone. So she left the cabinet. Now she's looking for something to do, as it were. And I think what she wants to do is be the leader of the Labour left, and that's why she's got her analysis in early, incongruously, in the Daily Telegraph.
Various schools of thought here of how the Labour Party should react, with people like Louise Haigh sort of accusing the party of tacking too much to the right, saying that is not the way to fend off reform. We need to be what we are, identify as what we are, which is a left-wing party, and be unapologetically left-wing. But do you think Keir's going to come under increasing pressure right now to row back from some of the net zero pledges, which you've now got the head of the GMB union saying, hey, this stuff is just not going to fly. You know, it's going to be too punitive on working men and women in the country. While other parts of the party, as you said, are going to be saying to him, no, come on, we've got to commit to the things that we stand for. What do you think he should do?
Well, I think what's interesting about what Labour people have said in reaction is, if Lou Hay is saying higher taxes for the sake of it, that's not a good look. But if she's saying some of the same things that Reform is saying, which is, you know, let's protect the industrial base, etc., then that's different. But how do you reconcile protecting the industrial base with some of the more extreme net zero policies? That, I think, is going to be the big question. So I'm not sure that Starmer's going to hike taxes or row back completely, but I think what you're going to have is much more talk about much less talk about net zero, much more talk about energy independence and how you can create green jobs of the future. And actually, that is a real thing. I mean, you know, we may disagree on this, but I think that what you want to do is move towards net zero, but do it in a way that takes people with you, and that means you lead technology of the future. And as Tony Blair says, means you're going to be burning fossil fuels for some time to come as part of the transition, as part of the mix. So, I mean, my old boss, Ed Miliband, I'm not sure that I would be too comfortable with my feet under the table this week. I think that there's going to be big pressure on getting rid of the Attorney General, not a job that gets talked about very much behind the scenes, but that's the Chief Law Officer for the government. So every law the government wants to pass goes across his desk. And who is he? He is an international human rights lawyer whose commitment to the ECHR makes a sort of obsession is probably too weak a word for it. So there's lots of pressure internally. So the kind of blockages are some of the things. And immigration, which no doubt we'll talk about in a moment, I think is going to be a big issue as well.
What is so fascinating about today, days like today, VE Day, really do contextualise. It sort of puts in stark relief the politics of today. And it's funny, you know, thinking about the ECHR. Of course, it was expressly set up after the end of the Second World War to try and prevent the sort of atrocities that took place. And yet, when you see what has happened with that legislation, what it's being used for, and you think back to the veterans, hearing so many stories today of people's relatives who fought so bravely, who gave so much to defend this country and defend its nationhood. That, for me, and you know, that's what I want to ask you about now. I don't quite know how to formulate this question, but this idea that, you know, certainly for me, nationhood and national pride are such important things. This idea that being British is our culture, our language, the Judeo-Christian values that underpin us, and we have every right to want to protect that. And then at the same time, you hear stories of people fighting together. You know, the Gurkhas keep coming up all the time. Other people saying that, you know, men and women from all over the Commonwealth, Canadians, Australians, Pakistanis, all contributing, fighting in all corners of the world, in Egypt, in Italy. My grandfather, I think, at one point served in Palestine. You know, this really was a world war, and it's how in today's society we sort of marry those things together by saying, look, the nation state is so important. Surely that is what we were fighting to protect 80 years ago. But also that isn't necessarily the same thing as being racist. It's not an unpleasant, a nasty or a dangerous thing to love your nation and want to protect it. And actually many nations came together in order to do that.
Absolutely. And of course, I mean, look, first of all, can I just say how moving the stories that the listeners and viewers have been phoning in with this morning, and I'm sure that I fear you're going to cry again, but in a good way, at the very, very moving tales that we've been hearing. And obviously in some ways it feels weird talking about politics on a day like today, but you know, it's not just the 80th anniversary of VE Day, because of course what happened just a few weeks later was Labour's greatest ever victory, the 1945 election of the Attlee government, and the creation of the National Health Service and the welfare state as we know it. And of course what that happened in is an atmosphere of patriotism. People didn't think that voting Labour was an unpatriotic act. They thought that the values of the Labour Party were aligned with the values of the people who just sacrificed so much both on the home and the fighting fronts between 1939 and 1945. So I think that the left needs to get away from this idea that there's something there's something wrong about patriotism, and there's something wrong about saying that you have a particular view of the country you want to live in. So, you know, I think there is a chance for the government to regroup. I don't think that intrinsically people on the centre-left of politics are unpatriotic or out of tune with national values. But at the moment, I think people think they are. And I think some of the policies they see mean that they've got reasons for thinking they are. So, we need a serious reset. I'm half Australian, and we've heard, you just mentioned there the Australian and New Zealanders. We had Anzac Day which commemorates the First World War just a few days ago. People get up in the middle of the night because it happens at dawn. So the commemorations, it happens at dawn in Australia and New Zealand, as it happens in dawn in London to commemorate that. We just saw the Australian Labour Party, which had a ropey start to its 3 years in government, just have one of their biggest ever victories at the weekend in their general election. So it can be done, but you need to show leadership and you need to show common sense. Take Mark Carney in Canada, who threw out the carbon tax on his first day in office and got re-elected. So, there are lessons to be learned. I mean, politicians have to say it's going to be, we'll just carry on with what we've been doing. But, that's obviously not sustainable. We're going to see a recalibration of what Labour offers.
Is the problem not? And I'm looking at some of these pictures now. It just, it sends shivers down my spine looking at the amazing military uniforms. We've got Ukrainian servicemen and women marching this, who themselves are currently at war. Wow, look at, Prince William, our future king, and his military regalia. I mean, it is a moment of incredible pride, and the symbolism is so vital. And yet there'll be people who are listening to this today who still sting and feel extremely hurt by some of the language that Keir Starmer's used, labelling people as far-right and thugs, when predominantly people are deeply worried about this nation. They are deeply worried about people coming in from very different cultures who don't have this nation's interests in their hearts. They don't actually even like our culture for the most part, and they're wreaking havoc on our shores, whether it be rape gangs, whether it be illegal migrants. And people want to feel like their government actually stand up against this and stand for the Brits, including people from around the world who have come here and made Britain their home. There was an incredible story about Hans, who I think is someone's great uncle Hans, who was a Luftwaffe pilot, who crashed over here in Dover, became a prisoner of war. Then he became an RAF test pilot and then a businessman, and every year gave loads of money to the RAF Benevolence Trust. I mean, you can be British in your heart and soul without being born here, but the problem is, and we know this, that all too often this is not happening anymore. And when people are trying to speak to this, whether it be in protest, whether it be in comment, they feel like they're being attacked. And so Keir Starmer, I think, has made a lot of people feel like they are part of the cohort that he calls far right?
Look, I think he's trying to walk a tightrope by acknowledging concerns. After he said those things, branding the rioters as far right, he did say that in his conference speech that being worried about immigration doesn't make you far right, and it certainly doesn't make you racist. But maybe he hasn't got that balance right. You're absolutely right. You have to have a set of shared values. We think about people from around the world. I just had brunch with a Polish friend of mine, and we were thinking about all those Polish aircrew who I think had the best record. I'm sure if you will correct me, who knows their military history better than me, but had the best record in the Battle of Britain in terms of the number of hits, and so many made their homes here after the Second World War, and that happened with people from around the world as well. But you have to have a shared set of values, and people rocking up illegally on boats, having passed through safe country after safe country after safe country, is not fulfilling the wishes and the sacrifices that people made for in the Second World War, nor is it in any way practicable as a country to cope with, and nor is it fair on the people who travel in the small boats, many of whom end up passing away themselves in tragic accidents. So it's a mess. It needs to be sorted, and the government really will not get re-elected if it doesn't, to use Rishi's phrase, stop the boats, and if it doesn't get a grip on legal migration, because this is not just a sort of minor wake-up call. This is a very serious message to all the political parties, and I don't think there's anything inherently right-wing about saying that you don't want small boats to arrive. I think it's common sense, and Labour needs to be seen to be on your side. Sometimes we use that as a slogan on leaflets, on your side. People have to feel it. It's not just a slogan.
I'm going to read some of these messages, and then we can sort of react to them together, because they're just coming in thick and fast today. So I'm sort of wanting to move around all of my schedule and go, right, sure, this is more important. My name is Adam, and just to say, my granddad was in the Royal Navy. He was on the west coast of Ireland in 1941 at midnight on a convoy patrolling. I found out he got shot. It's just amazing stories. Let's go down to this one, so I'm sort of putting them in as I go. Yeah. Please mention my father, Staff Sergeant Peter Berry, who went ashore in Normandy in 1944 with a mobile workshop. A few weeks after D-Day, he was very modest about his part in the war, and always referred to those who did the real fighting. Although I think anybody doing anything during the war.
Absolutely, and I think Normandy was still a pretty hot place, even a few weeks after the initial landing. So, his service should be remembered.
I always remember my grandmother Maud talking about the Blitz in London. Yeah. My family home was Kingston upon Thames. She talks about hearing the V1 and V2 rockets going over. Auntie Jean was a coppersmith working in a factory making Spitfire fuel lines. Both grandfathers served in both World Wars. Henry Rose defending Hong Kong against the Japanese in 1941 as well. And that's from Tim Berry, who himself is an ex-Royal Navy submariner. It's amazing, actually, when you hear of people who've gone into the military, who have done it because they were brought up at the knee of their parents and grandparents telling these stories, and it sort of gave them the will and the wish to want to serve their country as well.
And that's why I'm glad that that defence spending is being increased. There is pretty much cross-party agreement on that, so at least that we're giving our armed forces in a very unstable world the tools that they need to do the job. Now it takes time for that spending to trickle through, but hopefully that will that will improve things for those who are serving.
Yeah, much reduced armed forces
Absolutely.
Actually,
and numbers hopefully will go up as well.
There are so many things when you just looking at World War II in historical context. Something that struck me, of course, and the impact of the Second World War continued such a long time. And I often think about Dig for Victory and rationing. When my mum was born, I think there was still rationing went on until
in the mid-50s.
Mid-50s, and back then only 60% of our food was grown in this country. We live with the same ratio today, actually, and when you look at what the Labour government have done to farmers, you do worry that if there were an emergency, and we know that, disruption to supply chains, the Houthi rebels attacking the Red Sea, the Black Sea, of course, could end up being under Russia's control. You think to yourself, if anything were to happen with food supply chains, where are we going to be?
Well, I think certainly I wouldn't want to be an investor in solar panels on farmland today, because I think perhaps people are seeing that some of the net zero policies like that go too far. And again, you're gaining on one hand and losing on the other hand. And you have to work out which of those two priorities is more important. I think food security is very important. It makes me uncomfortable if we're losing usable farmland for that. I think solar panels are great where they work, where they can be added to buildings, etc. etc. But sort of taking away food-producing farmland, I don't think is a wise idea for that. I think you're going to hear kickback on that. So look, let's hope that common sense, not just the election results as you say, but the sort of spirit of 1945, and that obviously means a lot for the country as a whole. But for my party, it means a lot as well, because it's that spirit of the country coming together. People thought the service votes were all going to vote for Winston, and people were hugely grateful and admiring what Winston Churchill had done. But in the election that came a few weeks after VE Day, what people wanted to do is they voted for change. They voted for a different sort of country from the one they'd had 20 years before. And above all, they voted for the Labour Party because they thought the Labour Party was on their side and understood their experience, what we're now called lived experience. I don't think that phrase was in anybody's imagination there. I mean, in a way that I think at the moment people don't think necessarily. If you're a kind of, member of the white working class, if you're in a town rather than a city, I'm not sure that people think that the government does get them in the way that people in 1945 thought the Labour Party got them.
Let's hope that sort of visceral connection we feel to our past today of all days actually serves this government and any future government to come in guiding them of how they should prioritise the British public. It is good and it is right to fight for one's nation. Matthew Larser, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
A short break now. When I come back, it's your calls and your messages. More of your memories and your family's contributions and legacies, because that's what today is all about. And back after this.
Powell has apologised for what she said on Friday night. I think she'd be mortified to hear that. And I know, having been in touch with Lucy last night, that she never wanted in any way to downplay, delegitimise or dismiss the experiences of victims of these appalling crimes. Now, I know that people say we should have a national inquiry. There have been a number of inquiries. I actually think actions are louder than words, and the one thing that we can work hard to deliver is justice for victims.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. It's going to be all your calls, all your messages. Let's get on with it. Hi, Alex. My granddad fought in the trenches in the First World War. Unfortunately, I never got to meet him, as he died young due to the effects of mustard gas. I can remember my dad telling me that his dad had 2 parallel scars on the top of his hand caused by a German bayonet. To think that if he hadn't won that hand-to-hand combat, then my dad, me and my sons would not have been born. My dad served in the RAF as a Lancaster engineer, and my mum was in the Wrens during World War II. Lest we we forget. Morning, Alex. Loving your programme. My father served on the Atlantic convoys from the age of 21. He was on board 2 ships which were sunk. Luckily, he was rescued. He died of a heart attack at the age of 42 from the injuries he received. Thank you, and the Talk community, for remembering. That's Diane in Kenilworth. And yes, thank you to you guys out there sharing your stories. It's amazing. Hi, Alex. My dad was in Bomber Command, and all the veterans that fought in the war to make this world a better place. Unfortunately, now we have a Prime Minister who thinks he's a Winston Churchill, but he'll never be like him. He'll stand there today with everybody. It makes my skin crawl, says Elaine from Essex. Wow, in Bomber Command. Wonderful to hear all these stories. Some have made the hairs on my arm rise. You're not alone. My mum was born in 1933, so as a little girl during the war, she told me the story of going across to her aunt's house one morning, and on the way home, she heard the sound of a plane. It was a German fighter. It opened up its guns and literally chased her, running zigzag across a road. And bullet holes were up and down around the door she dived into until they pulled down to the 80s. Until they were put. So I don't understand that bit of the message, but it sounds to me that that's an amazing. So a little girl being chased by German bombers, peppered with bullets, and the bullet marks being all around the door that she dived into for her safety. Wow. What an amazing, for well, I suppose all the wrong reasons, childhood memory. Let's speak to Mike, who is in Bangor in North Wales. Hello there, Mike.
Hello, Alex. How are you today?
I'm very well. How are you?
It's a quick one. A story of my grandmother. She told it one VE day.
Yeah.
She only ever told it once. And it was about a German fighter that got shot down over Wolverhampton, and the pilot bailed out and landed in the field behind the house. And so she went out and fetched him into the kitchen while they waited for the military police to come and take him off to be a prisoner of war, which was some 2 hours. So she spent 2 hours talking to a German young boy while her own sons were also out at war.
Wow.
And there's 2 sides to today. Yes, victory in Europe, but the cessation of the killing. And she was saying how this German boy didn't want to be flying the plane that he was shot down in. He didn't want to be flying over England. And so, at the end of the day, I think we all need to realise or think about how we are manipulated by our elected governance.
Yeah, I mean, this is what is so remarkable when you listen to more stories. And this, the truth is that there were men and women who lost their lives on both sides of the war. And it's all too easy to just sort of think in terms of good versus bad, nice versus evil. But most people who get caught up in wars, young people who are conscripted, who are forced to serve in the military, they don't necessarily do it because they're believing in what their particular government's saying. So many had no choice. Mike, thank you ever so much. We're going to take a short break now. Don't go anywhere. There's much more coming up after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back. Less snap, crackle and pop because we just changed my microphone. It was making some sort of grubby noises. Sounds like a sort of crisp packets being opened in my ear. So hopefully that is a bit clearer. You know what it's like in life. Sometimes tech isn't always on your side. Let's go back to your messages and your calls. Stephen Northamptonshire says, my grandfather served and was part of the Dodecanese campaign to free the Greek islands from fascist Italian control. My grandfather was captured carrying out a recce mission for an operation that is said to have inspired, in part, the film The Guns of Navarone. He was held as a prisoner of war in Africa. Wow. My grandfather died young. My dad swears his health issues were solely down to the treatment he received from his captors. I never met him, but I'm hugely proud of him, as I am of everyone else who helped ensure our freedom. God bless them all. When you think what people went through, you know, that the horrors that they saw in the Second World War, both at home and abroad, stories of people being prisoners of war. I mean, absolutely incredible. And you read this and you realise how lily-livered and weak and frail and spineless we can be today. How self-indulgent we are, thinking how dreadful our lives are when we've barely even seen a glimmer of this sort of suffering. Morning, Alex. I was born in 1955. Our generation was born with a Union Jack emblazoned into our hearts. We were one of the first post-war generations. We were proud of the members of our own family who gave their lives so that we can be free. Looking at the state of this country today, I have to wonder if their sacrifice was for nothing. The freedoms and values they fought and died for are being diluted to the point where the word patriotism is scoffed at. Very sad indeed. Yeah, I feel like that as well. I can't tell. It makes me angry. It makes me angry when you look at the sacrifice men and women made to protect Britain, and you think about if they were here looking at some of the things taking place in the United Kingdom today, what they would feel, what they would say. But they were the greatest generation. They didn't complain, didn't self-indulge with victimhood. Quiet, integrity and nobility. This is from Caroline. Hi Alex, I want to remember my two granddads on this day, Tommy Archibald and Tommy Teasdale, the two Tommies. I don't know all of the details, but Tommy Teasdale was at Normandy and lived with shrapnel in his leg until the 90s. Tommy Archibald fought in Burma and thankfully returned from the war, but very sadly died of a disease contracted when he was there shortly after he got back. My mum was only 9, but remembers her strong, hard-working dad with immense pride and love. My nana didn't get a war pension and had to work very hard to raise her 2 daughters. So many men were lost to fight for our freedom. Despite the rotten issues we face in this country, I do believe that grit will have been passed down to our younger generations and would stand up and be counted if it came to it, mainly from working class areas. Great show. Caroline, this is why we need to talk about these stories, so we do hand down that grit, that patriotism, that passion, that strength, that resolve, that mettle, that we value it, that we recognise how important it was, and we may try and emulate it. That is what today's all about. That is at the crux of all of it. That is why your stories are so important. Another quick message, then we'll take a call. My grandfather was South African and was stationed in North Africa during World War II. He was an engineer and a chef. The one day, him and 2 of his colleagues had to travel 20 miles through the desert to take supplies to one of their other camps, which was 22 miles away. On their journey, their Jeep broke down and they had to carry their equipment and walk. He was unable to fix the Jeep as he had no parts. On their journey, they were spotted by the Luftwaffe and they had to bury themselves in the hot sand to camouflage themselves. They laid in that hot sand for about 45 minutes before they thought it was safe to carry on. When they arrived at the camp, it was destroyed by the German Air Force and nothing was left. Only 2 people survived. They then had to walk all the way back to their base on the same day. On their journey back, they encountered an Italian patrol and they fought off the entire patrol between them. They all survived. What an amazing story, that Jacques in Andover. Wow. That's the stuff of movies. Let's speak now to Brian, who's in London. Hi, Brian.
Programme, your enthusiasm holds no bounds for me. I think you're wonderful, dear. You've got a fantastic programme.
Oh, thank you. No, it's not me who's wonderful. I'm just reading everyone else's stories, and it's the stories that are wonderful. I'm just the vehicle, and I'm so thankful to everyone who's phoning in and messaging and sharing these incredible stories of their relatives that we can all think about today. And what an important thing it is to do as well. Brian, tell us your stories.
OK, I'll give you two stories. One about my mum and one about my dad, if you can. During the war, we lived near Marylebone Station, and when the bombs come over, we spent most of our nights in the tube. And my mum got up every morning, went to work and built parts for the Lancaster bomber.
Wow.
And there's a Hoover building in the Western Avenue, which is an old-fashioned building. If you ever drive down the Western Avenue, you'll still see the old Hoover building where they actually built Hoovers.
Yes, the beautiful Art Deco building.
Yeah, in the war, it got turned over for people. My mum did all the dials for the Lancaster bombers during the war. She put them all together and did that. And when we was down the tube, we got come up 6 o'clock in the morning, and my mum went to work for 6 hours or 8 hours. So they never got any sleep. It was horrendous down the tube. You know, it was like, well, I was only little. I was only 3.5, so I don't remember too much about it really. But my mum was fantastic, you know, and so were women in the war. Forget about the women. My mum never heard from my dad for nearly a year when he was in the... I'll tell you a story about my dad now.
Yeah.
My dad was in a boat going to Singapore, and he was lucky. The boat broke down about 5 hours out from Singapore, and Singapore fell to the Japanese. If the boat had gone into that harbour that day, he would have been immediately captured by the Japanese. So the boat then turned round and went to Darwin in Australia, because in Darwin, the Japanese made a minor attack for about 6 months. He stayed in Darwin for 6 months. Then he went to India, and he was in the Chindits fighting behind enemy lines, fighting the Japanese. And when he went away, I was 3.5. I waved from Paddington Station, and the next time I see him, I was 8.5.
Wow.
And
gosh.
It was, I don't know how...
Oh, Brian, your strong mum, her resolve to wait all that time for your dad.
Yeah, it was tough.
Must have been so hard for her. And during this time as well, she's having to get shelter.
Yeah.
As London's being bombed, and with no sleep, she's going into work in the factory to make the dolls for the Lancaster.
Yeah. And then my dad come home, when he knocked on the door, there was this strange man standing at the door, because they used to wear Australian hats, and he was black, basically, because he'd been in the jungle. And I turned and ran round the other way and said, "Who's that strange man?" It was my dad.
That was your dad back after all that time? Oh,
yeah.
Goodness. Oh, Brian. I mean, talk to me about how your parents then sort of, after not seeing each other for so long, that must have been so strange.
To be honest, Alex, I don't know how they did it, but my dad was always a cheerful man, and basically he seemed to just get on, and within about 2 weeks he was my best mate, and it was like fantastic.
Oh, it's amazing. There was something very special. There's a reason we call them the greatest generation, because there was something. There was humanity, there was optimism, there was pragmatism, there was bravery. And do you know what there wasn't? There wasn't this horrible, self-indulgent victimhood that perhaps we've had it way too easy. Perhaps it's allowed us to become these flabby, narcissistic, weak... You know, but you kind of think, how am I ever going to fill those boots? How can I ever make the measure of those people who went before us and fought and had those life experiences we're discussing today? I mean, Brian, I could hear the emotion in your voice as you spoke to me then. Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for sharing that story. Wow, that's really quite Just hearing a grown man talking about his relatives and hearing his voice break and just thinking 5 years with his parents separated and all the things that they both went through. Right, let's speak to Dr. Rakib San now, who is a social policy analyst and writer. Rakib, fantastic having you on the programme. And do you know what really strikes me about listening to all the stories of VE Day? The amount of people who were stationed all over the world, people who saw active service in Burma, Japan, Australia, Egypt, Israel, North Africa, I mean everywhere. And then also hearing the stories of people who fought alongside the Brits, the Allies as well. I mean, the lessons of today are so important, aren't they?
Oh no, absolutely. And that fight against Nazism and fascism was a truly international one. And I think that it's been so wonderful to see the parade today commemorating the 80th anniversary of VE Day. And I think I've listened in to some of those people who have talked about their family background, those who may have been their parents or indeed their grandparents who fought against Nazism and fascism and contributed towards that Allied victory. I think the one word that really comes to mind for me is resilience. And I think that there's a certain determination, resilience, and as you said, that optimism as well, which I think is somewhat lacking in modern day British society. And I think you made the point there that maybe at times because before we had it so good, and of course, we do have problems in our modern society, that's a given. But I think that at times it's worth looking at previous generations and seeing how tough they really had it and draw some inspiration from that.
What I want to talk to you about is the element of social cohesion with all of this, because we're often reminded during things like VE Day about the number of young men who came over from countries such as India, Nepal, Pakistan, African nations across the Commonwealth to serve alongside the Allies in a war that perhaps where they came from, it kind of felt it had nothing to do with them, perhaps, that it was so remote from them. This was war that started off, of course, in Europe. And the significance of that, because today we live in such a divided world where we worry about when people come into this country, whether they're going to integrate with us. And then we look back at how these people from these different nations didn't just sort of meet each other, but were together under the most grueling of circumstances where they had not just each other's backs, but they were defending each other's lives.
No, absolutely. And I made the point that the British Indian Army is the largest ever all-volunteer force in history. And I think the point I make there is that many Commonwealth migrants who then relocated to the UK shortly after the Second World War, for some of them, it wasn't so much they were moving to a different country. It almost felt like, in an emotional sense, they were relocating to the motherland in a way. And you have families there who had linkages with the British Indian Army and also the Merchant Navy as well. And I think the point that you made, that there's a strong sense of national solidarity, but I think that has been eroded over time. And I think also we find it difficult at times to truly understand what we stand for. And I think that in an increasingly fragmented society, that is a cause for concern. And I think that if you're talking about society back then, if you want to talk about immigration was relatively low. In recent times, we've seen unprecedented levels of immigration. But I think crucially, the point there is many of the migrants who are moving to the UK, they had a certain affection for the UK. Indeed, we're talking about people who may well have served in a military sense or in a naval sense in defeating Nazism and fascism. So they had a natural connection with the UK, and that's certainly not the case with many migrants who do move to the UK in this day and age.
Let's talk about Nazism and fascism, because one thing that really upsets me is when particularly the hard left jump to use the word Nazi or fascist all too easily. They'll say about people who want to discuss immigration, what you were just talking about there, integration, that they are Nazis, that they are the fascists. And yet we do live once again in an era that is alarmingly censorious. that says you're not allowed to discuss these things, that name calls, that silences, that cancels. And it sometimes feels to me that those people who are shouting Nazi, fascist at other people are perhaps the people who are probably more closely representing the traits of those particular evil movements.
No, I mean, I've seen people call those who are leading Reform UK Nazis and fascists. They should be reminded that the chairman of Reform UK is Zia Yusuf, a man who's very proud of his British identity and is of Sri Lankan Muslim origin. And I think that people on the hard left, but I don't think it's just the hard left, there's even people in the liberal left who are not especially sensible in terms of how they use terms such as Nazi and fascist. They've drained those terms of their historical significance. And I think actually they do a great disservice. They're actually quite disrespectful towards those who have genuinely suffered at the hands of Nazi Germany and indeed fascist regimes.
Yeah, and I think there's so many important lessons to learn today, and remind ourselves that the sort of horrible propaganda, the spite, the bitterness, the pure evil, and how dangerously easy it was that Hitler was able to brainwash huge sections of society into sharing hatred and bitterness towards other people. Dr. Akiba-san, thank you ever so much for coming on. We're going to take a short break. We're going to conclude the programme with your messages, your calls, your memories to celebrate the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Please dial 0344 499 1000. It's your last opportunity to talk with me and share the stories of your families' roles, their part that they played in World War II with the nation. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp message as well. If you'd rather send a text message, it's 87222. Remember to write the word talk before you text, and I can't wait to speak to you and hear your stories after this.
Powell has apologised for what she said on Friday night. I think she'd be mortified to hear that. And I know, having been in touch with Lucy last night, that she never wanted in any way to downplay, delegitimise or dismiss the experiences of victims of these appalling crimes. Now, I know that people say we should have a national inquiry. There have been a number of inquiries. I actually think actions are louder than words, and the one thing that we can work hard to deliver is justice for victims.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. Your messages, your calls, there's so much to get through. This is an incredible story. James Cunningham. My papa was at Dunkirk. He was one of 14 left from the battalion. After he was rescued by a skiff at Dunkirk, he was reassigned to the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders. He then went to India and Burma. The troop ship took 13 weeks and 2 days to reach India, as it had to turn every few minutes to avoid the U-boats. There was a choice on the boat: join the boxing competition or peel potatoes. And he was undefeated. After India, he served in Burma, and his group were known as the Chindits. He was injured with Lord Mountbatten of Burma. He had shrapnel in the back of his head that couldn't be removed. If Lord Mountbatten wasn't in the same armoured carrier that was attacked, he probably wouldn't have returned, as there wouldn't have been an effort to rescue them. Lord Mountbatten, of course, was the Queen's cousin. Everyone, apart from Mountbatten and Papa, died from the explosion. The best papa I could have had. He didn't let the war bother him. What a character he was. And this is amazing. Wait for this, Catherine Beryl Hewitt. I'd be very surprised if my great aunt did not know the father of your first caller. She also lived in Eltham. She worked for Sidcup Council as a teacher, and when not at work, she was a volunteer fire watcher and bomb spotter. Just like the father of our first caller, that story of him having to dive into the gutter to avoid the doodlebugs. Amazing lady, proudly Welsh and 4 foot nothing tall. Imagine, they probably knew each other. And so many people calling in saying that their fathers or grandfathers worked for the RAF in North Africa, as did my granddad. Imagine, so many people must have encountered each other. Hi, Alex. My nan, Alice, was a cobbler in World War II, fixing the soldiers' boots. I remember her telling me she got very drunk on port and lemons on VE Day and danced in the street with her friends. Amazing. Right, let's speak to Richard, who's in Plymouth. Hi there, Richard.
Hello, Alex.
Tell me your family's story.
Well, basically, it's a story about 2 women and a frustrated man. First one, my grandmother, she was what they call a powder girl in the First World War. Basically, she was seconded to make bombs. Baker and Bessemer, the famous steel maker, they converted all their factories to manufacture bombs in the First World War. And my grandmother became Mr. Baker's housekeeper after the First World War, and he commissioned a painting, which I believe is either hung in or owned by the London Science Museum. And Bessie, my grandmother, she was invited down to unveil it. Never talked about it. Very proud woman. I admired her. And my mother was a land girl for the first 2 years of the Second World War.
Wow.
And then drove an ambulance for the last 3 years. But the funny bit of the story is that after the war, having driven this ambulance for 3 years, had 12 goes at a driving test and couldn't pass it.
No.
Bless her. She was another fabulous woman.
Yeah.
Both sadly passed away now, but the frustrated man was a chuck up to the Bevan boys, really, and the compulsory works order people who wanted to go and fight, but given compulsory works orders. And my father used to do a shift down the mine, come out and then do another shift on top of the winding tower, aircraft spotting.
Wow. Wow.
So, you know, it takes all sorts, doesn't it, to make a war?
Well, this is it, yeah. I mean, we needed to make sure the miners, I mean, it's so important. Just because when there were men who didn't go fight abroad, the things they had to do back at home, it was every single hand to the tiller. Everyone had to play their role in protecting this country. And, you know, listening to the story about, you know, women during the war, when you think about the land girls, when you think about women working munitions factories, women like my grandma making the military aircraft, women driving ambulances, and you just think, in today's society, there's so much focus on getting lip fillers and being an influencer and wanting to look like a Kardashian and posing with a handbag, and that's hard work. And these women of our, you know, my grandma's generation, They didn't have time to worry about whether they had lipstick on or whether they looked good in a photograph. They were having to do the jobs of men. In fact, it was the first time in history, really, that women were allowed to do the jobs of men, and it changed our society forever. You know, I've got a picture in my house. It's one of my favourite pictures of our late Queen. I don't know if you know this picture. Black and white photo, of course, and it was when she was working as a mechanic during the Second World War, and she's there in her regalia with her spanners, bonnet up, rolling under a Jeep, fixing it. And I remember thinking when the Queen died, that's my Queen. That's my Queen. And I just think it's such a powerful message to send to women out there everywhere. And you look at what the women did in the First and Second World Wars, that there is more to life than posing on Instagram. Richard, thank you ever so much for your fantastic story. Let's speak to Nick now, who's in Lincolnshire. Hi there, Nick.
Hi, Alex. Sorry. My granddad did 36 years in the army. Joined in the 30s, left in the 60s. Was a sergeant major in the infantry when he left. And although I was in the military as well, he didn't really talk about the war. The only thing he ever told me was, he said they sent him back to do the first ever P Company during the war, and he was a sergeant at the time, and he said he was marching up this hill, and some officer said, "Sergeant Kears, go back and get that man." Someone was sort of lagging at the back, and he said, "This is rubbish." So he walked up to the officer in charge of the course and said, "You can shove your P Company, I'd rather be in the trenches shooting Germans."
Wow.
So they sent him back to France.
Gosh. I mean, it's incredible to think of. There's been amazing stories told today of people who've lied about their age just so they could be part of military service. People hearing stories of people who were part of D-Day, rescued, brought back to the UK, and then, off they go to fight in Burma, to fight in India. The resolve, the desire, the sacrifice that so many people made in the war effort has just been so truly humbling. I've never done a show before where I've had so much brilliant interaction, so many incredible stories and calls. I've barely been able to cover any of them. I've got people sending me pictures. These are my dad's medals. My dad fought in Burma, became very ill, lost loads of weight from malaria, as did many. And then my son fought in Afghanistan, and he's got both sets of medals together. Again, someone sent in a photograph here. My Uncle Tom, Special Boat Squadron, 1st SAS, 21 years old, killed in action, March 1945. I've not been able to get through all of your messages or calls today, and so many have just brought tears to my eyes. I've got a lump in my throat, I really do. Oh, Dr. David Bull, thank goodness you're here. This has just been the most powerful 3 hours I've had.
It's incredibly poignant, and actually it's really important that younger generations are educated as to its meaning and significance. And of course you and I do a lot in terms of politics, and actually we wouldn't have those freedoms and liberties without those people who paid the ultimate sacrifice. And actually listening to a lot of those stories from families, everyone was involved.
Yeah.
You never questioned it. You were told this is what you're doing, and you got on and did it. And that kind of ethic, I think, needs to be passed down through the generations, because you know, there are a lot of lessons to be learned there about the country coming together and actually fighting evil.
Yeah, it's one of those things where on a day like V-Day you can sort of go, oh well, I might just turn on the telly and watch a bit of the parade, or oh yes, it's happening, maybe there's a street party, maybe not. But I'm sure, you know, as a young person, you probably learnt at your grandparents' knees about stories from the Second World War, and hearing people wanting to share their own family's story, their own sort of individual family footprints as part of that legacy has just been so incredible. And it really does put in stark relief today's society.
Well, also it sort of underpins why security of the country is so paramount in terms of the country being incredibly unstable, the world being incredibly unstable, why we actually need to build up our defences, because of course there are dictators and there are terrible people around the world, and we must make sure we never forget what happened, the sacrifices that people paid to keep us free and enjoy what we do. Like, for example, the ability to turn on a television. Right. My mum was telling me stories about how she was evacuated, how these kids had to go off with suitcases with nothing. I mean, just imagine what that must have been like for those children.
Well, I mean, yeah, we hadn't even touched upon the evacuees.
Exactly.
There was an incredible story earlier on. A caller, Brian, and his father went and served for 5 years abroad in the jungle in Burma. When he came back after 5 years, his mum was working in a munitions factory during the daytime, nighttime in the underground, trying to shield herself, shelter from the Blitz. And 5 years later, His dad, he was 3 years old when his dad left to fight, and his dad came back when he was 8 years old. And you just think about the resolve and the strength of couples, proper, dedicated couples who stuck together through all of it.
But I think also all the minutiae of life disappeared, didn't it? Because it was about survival. And I was listening to people who said that their father went away, and when the father came back, they didn't know who this person was.
Yeah.
Because they'd been away for so long.
Yeah. The challenges. And yet the one thing that keeps coming out again and again that everyone's saying when they